travel and practice social distancing, we're going to hold this virtually. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed following the meeting. Everyone participating in the meeting will be accessing this from remote locations, so please can everyone ensure that all mobile phones are either switched off or to silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda for Tuesday 30th of June. I will ask officers to present a summary of the key points, and for the record the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may wish to switch their cameras on at that point, but I would ask you that, with the exception of the chairperson, at all other times to keep your cameras and microphones switched off, as this will help to minimise any background noise and interference to ensure the connection remains as stable as possible. If any members, officers or invitees wish to raise a point or question, they should use the instant messaging icon in the bottom left of the Skype window and simply type speak, and the chair will come to you in the order that they receive the requests. Please do not use your microphone until you're invited to do so by the chair. Can I just check if anybody has not got access to the chat function? Okay.
So, Chair, specifically, the head teachers, can you access the instant messaging chat and the pupil representatives?
Okay. Can everybody access that, including the invitees and the? Yeah.
They're indicating yes in the instant messaging chat.
Yeah. I should have checked the chat myself, shouldn't I? That would help. Right. Brilliant. Okay. So officers from Scrutiny will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout the meeting, and where necessary will mute those not being used. So can I now ask the Scrutiny officer to announce the names of the councillors in attendance at the meeting? Officers and invitees are asked to introduce themselves when they're invited to speak by the chair, and they should also ensure microphones and cameras are switched off when not in use.
Thank you, Councillor Gifford. If I may announce the members present at the moment, they are Councillor Alex Williams, Amanda Williams, Aniel Pachella, Charles Smith, who's the Cabinet Member, Gary Thomas, Jane Gebby, Janice Lewis, John Paul Blundell, Kay Rowlands, Kenneth Watts, Martin Jones, Mike Clark, Nicole Burnett, Pam Davis, Ross Durman, Sorrel Dendy, Tim Thomas, Tom Beadle, and yourself, Councillor Gifford, Chair. For the benefit of the recording, my name is Andrew Rees. I'm Democratic Services Manager. We are also joined today by pupil representatives who are Megan Lambert, Megan Stone and Max Williams. Thank you, Chair. There are also a number of head teachers present, as are a number of officers, and if they could introduce themselves just before they are going to speak then. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. The first item on the agenda is to elect a chairperson, and we were going to nominate Councillor Green, but I don't think she's here yet. Is she, Meryl? Sorry, I can't see the full list of attendees. Don't know whether she's arrived yet.
She hasn't rejoined the meeting yet, Chair, no.
Okay. Would I be able to chair it just to kick us off and hand over to Councillor Green when, as chair of the other scrutiny committee, and then hand over halfway through, or?
Andrew?
Councillor Gifford, I think it would probably be more pertinent if somebody were to move and second yourself into the chair pro tem, and then and obviously when Councillor Green does rejoin the meeting, if she could be moved and seconded into the chair. I think that would be appropriate.
Clifford.
Okay. Oh, there we are. Right, we've got a nomination and a seconder. Fab. Thanks, everyone. Okay. So item 2 then is apologies for absence. Can I ask Meryl or Andrew for the apologies, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Stephen Smith and Councillor Mike Kern, and also from Sue Roberts of the Education Department, Andy Rothwell of the Challenge Advisor, but he's been replaced by Andrew Williams of the Consortium this afternoon. And we also have apologies from the head teacher of Ysgol Gynradd Gymraeg, Bro Ogur. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Item 3 is declarations of interest, but before we do the declarations of interest, I know a number of you members will want to declare about a school governor position. So, Andrew, can you just clarify the position quickly with the school governor interests on this agenda?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As many of the committee will be members of school governors, so there's no requirement to declare as school governors. But however, if you do have declarations over and above your membership of your governing bodies, if you could declare those interests to us, please.
Okay, Councillor Dendy first.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to declare a personal interest. I'm running a Facebook page that gives out information about the consultation in regards to CCYD. It's just a personal interest. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Burnett.
Thank you. I'd like to declare a prejudicial interest as I have a son who is about to enter year 10 at Bryn Teg.
Okay. Councillor Amanda Williams.
Hi, I need to register, I think it's a personal interest, because I have a son who is currently in year 8 at Bryn Teg Comprehensive School.
Okay. And Councillor Beadle.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have, I don't know if it's personal and prejudicial interest, because I've been elected Chair of Bridgend Governors Association.
Okay, great. Okay, item 4 then is the review of the post-16 education provision across Bridgend, and this is a phase 4 post-consultation. So I'll now ask the Corporate Director for Education and Family Support to present his report, and then we'll hear from head teachers and pupil invitees on the consultation and proposals from within the report, after which I call on members of the committee to ask their questions in the order they wish to indicate to speak in the chat. So can I ask the Corporate Director for Education and Family Support to come in?
Thank you, Chair. So for the benefit of the recording, I'm Lindsay Harvey, and I'm the Corporate Director of Education and Family Support. Thanks to all members and Youth Council members and head teachers and other people who have joined us for this very important scrutiny meeting today. Obviously, 2 things on the agenda that would very much benefit from this meeting. The first is around post-16 education provision. The second, then, we will go on to talk about learner travel. So what I'm going to do, Chair, with your permission, there are 2 lead officers on these. They're going to talk us through the paper, and then through you, then we'll invite any comments or observations. So the first officer I'd like to introduce through you, Chair, is John Fabes, who will talk us through the post-16 report.
Good afternoon, Chair. Are we good to go?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, sorry. Carry on.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and it's good to be here to present this consultation feedback report on the phase 4 of the review. So this afternoon, I just want to first of all take you through the paper itself. I'll just briefly comment on each of the sections. It won't be verbatim. And first of all, just to indicate that we were extremely pleased with the level of responses that we had for this particular consultation exercise. They were well into the thousands, so it engaged widely across many parts of the sort of community in Bridgend. So I think we've had some excellent feedback on it. So heading into the paper itself, obviously we set out the corporate objectives that I'll get my paper rolling in front of me. Corporate objectives that the paper supports, and it really begins the story, I suppose, after the last cabinet meeting in November 2019, where a decision was taken to go for a consultation on 3 options for consideration. We had originally started with 6 broad concepts, if you recall, and these were now narrowed down to 3 options. Option 1 being a mix of 6 forms with some mergers, create some 6 form centres but local authority maintained. And option 2, which is a similar approach to keep some 6 forms open but also have some mergers into 6 form centres which might exist in the FE sector. And option 3 was the retention of all 6 forms in schools, but to build on the current position of partnership and collaboration in order to deliver on some of the issues and concerns that have been raised in the earlier parts of the review. So attached to the report is the full feedback consultation document produced by the communications team with the analysis of all the surveys. And we again went out for extensive public consultation on this particular round. First of all, we had an online survey and we had extensive responses through that. We also engaged once again with pupils in schools, a feature College might at some point generate a new presence in Bridgend with a brand new campus in the town centre, possibly linked to regeneration issues. In that new centre, it could have the capacity to include a sixth form centre along with the other facilities. So that was A. Outcome B in option 2 is to look at the STEM centre that's now under development at the campus down at Pencoed. And that has been future-proofed to allow it to be expanded to also incorporate a sixth form centre. So the second option was to look at positioning a sixth form centre on the Pencoed campus within the Bridgend College setting. So those were the two options there. And again, the same pattern we followed there. We give you the number of returns, those who disagree with it, and the breakdowns and the particular returns from different institutions, different schools, and the text comments are in there as well. And it's important to give you some of these nuanced returns, because if you look at the outcome B with the strongly disagree, 47% chose strongly disagree to this particular one, higher in some schools than others. But also if you look at the Pencoed Comprehensive School, actually it's quite a different view, because 72% were actually in agreement with outcome B. So a very different view compared to the other schools. And that's one important reason why we've broken out some of the different components, so you can see that reflected view in different settings. Outcome 3, or option 3 rather, was the retention of the sixth forms in the schools. And again, 75% strongly agreed with that. And we've given you the same patterns and breakdowns and the same text responses, pattern of responses in there. Finally, at the end of the survey, everyone was asked, are there any additional comments who would like to add in? And so the additionalities around here focused on 4 popular areas that were mentioned. Additional travel linked to the expense or possible expense for students or families. The retention of a sixth form in CCYD, with in particular reference to the expansion of that site to be able to include a sixth form centre and meet the predicted increase in pupil demand for places there due to the demographic changes in the local area. The other third item there is about investing in sixth forms. So rather than investing money in any new centres, there was a push to say, well, invest in the current facilities in schools and enhance those to make them provide better subject choices, etc. And a very sort of common theme throughout all of this was the notion of the relationships that students have with their teachers, and that familiarity, that environmental familiarity that students have with their current settings, not wanting that to be disrupted, and suggesting that any form of disruption to those relationships or to that place of study might have an impact on their well-being. So those are the sort of general feedbacks from the surveys. These are the pupil workshops in 3.8. So aside from the online surveys, we also took the students, the 1,200 odd students that we met face-to-face, we took them through the survey in a paper copy form and actually worked with them through each of the sections of the survey. And again, their detailed responses are provided in the tables that follow there. So in essence, you've got each school, whether what type of sixth form merger they preferred, and then you've got the outcomes across for the options 1, 2, and 3. The AND is agree, neutral, or disagree. There are 3 columns to populate the responses in, and the most popular one in that particular line, if you like, is highlighted in orange. So that was, if you want to, hone in on which was the most popular one amongst the students in those returns, that was the figure you should look at. Finally, option 3, keeping all 6 forms on the right there, you can see the percentages that were in support of that, and where that ranked in terms of a choice. If you're given a choice of the 3 options, and again, option 3, as in the main surveys, was by far and away the most popular amongst the students. So you've got a detailed breakdown there for each school. You've also got the youngsters were invited to add some text into their replies, and a selection of those statements are incorporated in the comments line within the display there. So that's a quick analysis of the student workshops. And again, we provide a little bit more of a nuanced breakdown of the individual schools to show you how each of them have broken down their responses. There's also a little indication in there of the distribution of students in each school. So you can see that we had a good representation in most schools from Key Stage 3, 4 and Post 16. And the various percentages are shown there. So it is a good broad view across the student bodies in the secondary schools. Then at 3.9, we then go on to the feedback that we had from the open events. So as I suggested, we had 8 open events which we held, and we were unable to hold an event at Archbishop McGrath, but in all other schools we did. And the comments that were recorded in all those meetings by the communications teams who worked hard with us on that have been brought into this section here. And 1,900 written submissions were received, and we have read every single one of those 1,900 and gleaned from them all the issues that people were raising. So here are some of the popular themes that emerge from that, and not surprising, transport and travel comes very high up the list. The pastoral care and relationships with staff, the ethos of the school, the life of the sixth form students within the school, the standards agenda was frequently mentioned. Impact on schools which might lose a sixth form, whether they would have, there's a whole range of issues that people had concerns for there in terms of the ability to have a strong staffing body in 11 to 16 school, people voting with their feet to change school to find one with the sixth form as opposed to one without. So there were a series of issues that might impact on schools that lose a sixth form. There were quite a lot of references to community impact and social disadvantage, that certain areas it was felt perhaps slightly more affluent areas were getting to retain sixth forms, when other areas that were seen to have greater disadvantage were losing theirs in some of these proposals, and people felt that was a significant concern. There were other options and possible developments. We did have some further ideas coming back from respondents that we could pick on, and we actually have taken notice of those, and you'll see that some of those are actually built in to the potential recommendations. The other areas there, we've got things like curriculum, the reliability of data, robustness of the data, the environment, health and well-being of students, and the whole notion of the management of change and the disruption caused by change. So all those were being referenced in the respondents, either in writing or in person. We did have some discussions, particularly in the open meetings, which brought in wider issues, if you like, and we just noted some of the key ones there. In particular, there was a number of references to the new local development plan, which will come into being in 2021, and whatever the housing developments that might come through that, and how they may impact eventually on the demography of an area and thereby the student populations in some of our secondary schools. So we had issues looking at that, school catchment areas, the position of the Welsh medium strategy sitting inside that local development plan, and the new housing areas, and so therefore the balance between English medium and Welsh medium provisions in different areas. And again, pupil demography would be affected by that, and some issues around capital investment and staffing. So that's the sort of breadth of issues that were brought to our attention through this consultation. So in the section 4, we move on to our current position, and here we're picking up on some of the sort of critical issues really, and just explaining where these are at the moment. Transport was clearly a very key issue in all areas of the consultation, and so we would put together here some background at the moment. So it was important, I think, to realise how much transport currently sits inside the post-16 system, whether it's for Welsh medium provision, whether it's for faith provision, whether it's for twilight provision in the colleges, the travel that a large proportion of youngsters do every day to get to Bridgend College, the inter-school collaborations and the transport involved there. So there is already a significant amount of travel going on in the system, and I think we need to recognise that that travel does not seem to disrupt or cause any significant issue with non-attendance or with standards. So although people are very concerned in the consultation feedback around transport issues, some of the concerns that are raised should be, if you like, prevalent in the current system, because there's already a lot of transport going on, but they're not prevalent. The youngsters actually seem to cope particularly well with the current situation. But that does outline the numbers of youngsters who are moving, the times of day they're moving, the volumes of movement, the costs in the budget, etc. And so you get a position focused around that. And we do mention the public transport and scheduled coach services where we've got specific provision in place. So that's where we are with transport at the moment, the current position. Obviously, you'll come back to a more detail and look at this in the second report today, where there will be a debate, obviously, around the post-16 transport element in the council's budgets and the service we currently provide. In the 4.4.1, we're looking to see where the issues on transport have come to the fore. So in particular, a lot of families in options C to F, outcome C to F in option 1, where we're looking at issues around Maesteg, CCYD, Cynfig, Pencoed, and perhaps additional travel coming out of any mergers in those areas. The families up there were quite concerned about the potential costs. The range of £5 to £30 a week is values which are mentioned to us in the consultation, particularly in the public meetings, where families brought to our attention the sort of costs they're either having to pay or are likely to pay in the future if transport falls on families. And then time and distance is an issue there, not just the cost. There was references to the extension of the school day making youngsters very tired, impact on their well-being, time that could have been spent in learning is being spent in travel. Also, that obviously, if decisions go in a particular direction, then youngsters in Bridgend College might be in particular disproportionately affected, because the vast majority of their learners, of course, do travel significant distances to get into the college. So we try and, in this section, then link the concerns that we've had expressed to us by respondents with the potential issues emerging in the school transport paper, which you'll discuss later, and the impact of any of those options in the post-16 recommendations with those transport issues. I mentioned in 4.5 the local development plan, and I've mentioned that briefly before, which is the difficulty of making long-term decisions over post-16 when some of the demographic potential changes in the county borough are not yet in the public domain from 2021 onwards, and therefore to take certain concrete decisions at this point might be inappropriate until that wider view and wider demographics is known in some months' time. So it's just to point out that that is a potential issue. School-specific considerations. Okay, so we go into some detail here about particular options, 4.6 and 4.6.1. So outcome A, which was the Bryntyrion and Brynteg, with a merger into a single sixth form centre of their sixth forms. There are capacity issues at Bryntyrion, which we have been alerted to, and these may be exacerbated in the future. Both schools will have sixth forms in excess of 250 or above, so they are viable in their own right, but equally a combined sixth form of that size would be a significant player, if you like, in the market in terms of size of sixth form provision, and be able to offer a very wide range of courses. The mention there of Heronsbridge has come into the picture. There are no final decisions around that. We're simply flagging up in this part of the report that should at any point, with the discussions around the future of Heronsbridge Special School, if that their existing premises became available, it may well then be worth considering that as the site of a joint centre for the two schools, and we see some merit in pursuing that as a longer term prospect, not in the short term. So there's some further points around that. We are also mindful in terms of long-term planning contexts that generally speaking Welsh government does not build secondary schools of a size of less than 900. And so when the longer term strategy of demography is looked at, there's a balance to be struck. So if there is expanded housing in Bridgend County, if that housing tends to be spread across the county, then we may not have sufficient focal points to develop an entirely new secondary provision. So that means that we need to look at ways of how we extend or improve the capacity of existing sites, or if we can't do that, maybe something to do with the actual sixth form component within that site. So there are a number of ways in which we're suggesting that could be addressed going forward. Outcome B was fairly positive support for Porthcawl Comprehensive, and the future of that school. There is regeneration in the area, there is going to be some expanded housing, and we expect the student population in the sixth form there to be maintained at the 300 mark plus going forward. Config Comprehensive and Porthcawl, there was a fairly broad spread of opinion around that. On the face of it, the merger of a small sixth form with a larger sixth form would look in the vicinity, would look beneficial to both schools. Whereas the community loss factor felt quite strongly in Config, And again, if you take sixth forms out of that school, does that diminish the role of sixth formers and those senior students and the aspirations of junior students in that provision? But at the very least, we're looking at to say, could there be some enhancement of the partnership arrangements that currently exist between those two schools? Outcomes D, E and F were around CCYD and Maesteg, Pencoed and Cunfig, a group of schools to the north side of the borough there. But I think we have to note that the responses from CCYD, which came back with particular reference to the original planning applications for that school, which marked out clearly that there was areas of the school for expansion in the future. So there are some small areas which have been demarcated as potential of future expansion, which we did not factor in into these papers in the first instance. So we have clearly picked up on that from the governing bodies and other stakeholders in that area, and we now have incorporated those into some of the suggestions that we're making for future developments. And again, in outcome option 2, outcome A and B, quite a mixed sort of position there. On the face of it, you would look to see that there was general disagreement with engaging sixth form provision in the FE sector. However, if you look at Pencoed in particular, there actually is a strong support there, both from the governing body and from the other respondents to the survey. I think their experience in working with the college for the last 3 years through the Penybont Sixth Form College partnership arrangement has proved fruitful, and they've seen the benefits of that type of collaboration. So in order to sort of get underneath these sort of overall percentages of disagreement, it's important to see where we've got pockets of experience that perhaps shine a light on a potential way forward in the future. So the STEAM Academy that's being built on the Pencoed campus, in conversations with the college, we know that now is future-proofed for additional expansion. Should a sixth form centre be the way forward down there? And certainly I think the school, many of the students and the governors are actually very interested in developing that line of thought and developing their partnership further in that neck of the woods. We have to say that sixth form numbers have held up down in Pencoed. They've been slowly increasing over the last few years, but a particular interest has been the rise in standards. So over the last 3 years, there's been a significant rise in standards since that partnership was put in place. On to option 3. This is the most popular of the options, which is to retain sixth forms in all our secondary schools. But we have recognised in the earlier reports that we have produced that there are a number of issues that we are concerned about in terms of the equality that students have across the piece in access to a good curriculum offer, and the standards agenda. We have highlighted the differences in standards across institutions and across subject areas. So there are a number of sort of potential weaknesses. We've had financial constraints in recent years, not so much this financial year. It's eased off now in post-16 to an extent, but it has been there. We've taken a significant hit on budgets over a number of years. So we had to look at not just simply keeping the current system as it is, but how we can build on that going forward. Now, I think in particular, one of the areas that we had given consideration to in the past was blended learning, and how blended online learning can support the delivery of some subjects or partly in all subjects, and in particular for minority subjects. So in this section here, what we're setting out is a range of prospects to be taken forward. that if we go with option 3 and maintain sixth forms in all settings, we will require these sorts of changes. Now, in particular, the first bullet point refers to a more closely involved curriculum offer. We still don't have a fully integrated curriculum offer in Bridgend. There's a partial integration of the curriculum offer, and I think there is scope for building on that, either extensively across the county as a whole or amongst groups of schools, so that we have groups of schools that become much more closely integrated than they currently are. So rather than one hat fits all, as it were, across the borough, it may be that we need to have slightly different patterns in different parts of the borough, but that greater integration of the curriculum offer would be the aim. The second bullet there looks to formalising these arrangements. At the moment, there is not an underlying formality and a written agreement between the governing bodies of the different institutions. So we would look to formalise that process and make sure that there is an actual sort of, if you like, written constitution in a sense to the partnerships and the collaboration. So it's very clear what the expectations are of the members of a particular group or more widely across the borough. And that agreement, if you like, will be set out in a formal memorandum of understanding. So these are the sorts of ways we can build on and secure improvements in the current system. That would produce things like, for each group or the whole group, depending on which way it pans out, a single online prospectus. So there is a single reference point to students for the sixth form offer amongst our schools, and that they have a genuine access to all those courses that are on offer, and that there is a clear commonality amongst the sort of policies and processes and support, so that there is a greater consistency of sixth form experience across the piece. I mean, I have to say that, our sixth forms do work extremely well. There is some great work going on within them, but there are also some inconsistencies or differences of practice. And it's about identifying the best practice across all those settings and building that into a more formal process so that every student benefits from the best. The next what is the affordability. There are some slightly different methodologies that one can use to look at the affordability of programs that you can put on to better match your grant income with the amount of provision that you could provide. So I think a spotlight on that to make sure we're using the best methodologies available to us and learning perhaps from how other areas deal with that. And then the final bullet in that section is about the blended learning approach. Now, of course, since this paper was first put on the blocks, we've had COVID, we've had the lockdown, and since then a tremendous interest in blended learning, online learning, distance learning, and I think we're all learning a huge amount of how successful or the opportunities that brings, and certainly through sixth form provision, I think that now has to come forward and play its part in the future, and in particular for those minority subjects where they would in danger of withering from the vine. Indeed, we've lost quite a number of subjects. About a dozen subjects have disappeared in recent years from the curriculum offer, and it may be that through this type of approach we can bring some of that choice back into the curriculum again. So those are the different options and how we might be able to take some of them forward. And then these are the proposals that we are putting forward to Cabinet. First of all, to obviously note the content of the public consultation report and the various analyses that we've applied to that. And then we're suggesting that currently, option 3, which is to retain sixth forms in all our settings, is the strategy for the short to mid-term. But link the bullet points we've just been talking about we would be looking for some impetus and change and improvement on the position that we are currently in. If we move to the third one there, obviously that's a reference to the other policy areas where decisions are yet to be made but will impact on post-16. So in particular, school transport, the local development plan, which is under construction for 2021 onwards, Welsh medium education strategies interlinked with the English medium, and therefore the volumes of students going through the two different routes, and that leading to school capacities and catchments. So we feel that there are a number of areas where we've still got some decision making that needs to come together to inform longer term post-16 provision planning. We are recommending that further work is done on the Penybont Sixth Form College partnership and the proposals for a potential sixth form centre at the Bridgend College STEAM Academy down at Pencoed. So we do believe that there are benefits in that. With regard to CCYD, I think we want to respond to the feedback on the consultation from many of the respondents there to look more carefully at that site, to look at the demographics in the area, to look at the potential for expanding that site, and either having bespoke sixth form provision facilities incorporated or general expansion of the campus so that it can accommodate the pupil pressures which are predicted in a number of years' time, and that therefore allowing it to have a viable sixth form on site. So I think there's clearly some mileage in further exploration of that. And then finally, we are recommending that there is continued investigations of the Brinteg and Brinterian sixth form centre. There is a potential building that might house such a one if it comes about, again dependent on later decisions by Cabinet and others. So we would still want to retain that as a proposition for the long term, but that will have to wait its due course before coming to any form of realisation. So those are the proposals that we're intending to put to Cabinet. We have updated our equalities impact assessments and wellbeing future generations implications. So those have all been updated from previous reports. Financial implications, we have mentioned the budgets and the shortfall, the reduction in budgets and budget pressures in recent years. Although, as I said, this year and next year, that budget is reflating again. So not quite so much pressure as we've faced in the past there. We come back to in 8.3 the reference to the transport costs and how the pressures of that have been felt through the post-16 consultation feedback. And we come then forward to the final recommendations to the members of Scrutiny to note the contents of the report, the appendix and all this, the feedbacks in there. And there is, some of the appendices are very large. I wouldn't recommend downloading appendices 12 and 13. I don't think they'd even arrive in your inbox. So, but we do have all the volumes of correspondence there and available. We ask you to note the proposed recommendations that we are suggesting is made to Cabinet, and happy to take, obviously, questions and your points of view going forward.
Okay, thanks, John. Many thanks for your presentation there of the report, which is very comprehensive. Before I bring members in, and others in, just a couple of housekeeping points. I know Councillor Green has now joined whilst John was speaking. So what I will do is I'll hand over to Councillor Green at the end of this item, so she can do items 5 and 6 in the chair, or I'll propose at least with the agreement of the committee. On top of that then as well, I know a number of you have mentioned various IT issues. I think Ros has said various updates take between 2 and 5 minutes. So unfortunately, that's just one we're going to have to take on the chin, and you'll have to just rejoin as soon as you can. But it is being webcast. If you can watch it on another device in between, perhaps that might be an idea if that's something you're able to do. Right, before I open up to questions from members, can I ask if any of the head teacher or pupil invitees, as I said at the beginning, wanted to come in with their views on the consultation and the proposals within the report, and can any of those indicate in the chat, please? Just wait a second. Okay, sorry, got a couple here. So come first bring in Megan Stone then, please.
I'm from CCYD, and as you were saying about like the transport, I think the point that I know I make, because I live up the valleys, so a problem for the transport for me isn't so much what's going on currently, but it's the addition to transport. And I think that's something that wasn't really pushed across. But it's not only just, obviously there's transport with the school, but also with the current twilight, if you have the transport from the school to Bridgend College, and then you find your way home, which is very easy. But the addition then to saying some of them was like an hour on to transport if you go through public transport, such as buses and trains. And I think that's something that wasn't highlighted as much in the final report.
Okay, John and Lindsay, can I ask you, can I do the pupil representatives and the head teacher representatives in one big go, and I'll let you address them all at the end if that's okay, before I bring other members in. Can I bring the youth mayor then, Megan Lambert, in, please?
Hiya. I've got a few points from a few school representatives who can't be here today, so they just wrote in a few concerns, their opinions and what they had, and then I've got my own opinion at the end. So we've got someone from Porthcawl Comprehensive School. They have said that if there was one sixth form hub, she would have felt more grown to go. She would have benefited from the bus passes. She highlighted some benefits, including there'd be more subjects offered. Big classes mean you can have some more ideas and more things to discuss. And she also highlighted the benefits of increasing social circles. I've also got another individual from Kenford Comprehensive saying that if the sixth form was in a central location that she wouldn't have gone, as she's unable to cope with the different environment, location and new students and teachers all in 1 year. She highlighted the security of knowing the school layout, students and the teachers as well. So we've got a couple of contradictory points there, but I'd say there's definitely things that should all be considered. In my opinion, it's important to highlight things like UCAS tutors, how they do give personal recommendations. I know from personal experience, Bridgend is classed as a deprived area, which has helped me get into university on low offers. And there are a lot of first generation students coming to university, so having those personal UCAS tutors that a lot of schools in the borough have to offer that know you is really helpful when they help you through your application to university. Sorry, that was a long one then, but
no problem. Right, sorry, I'm just trying to navigate these chats here. Right, okay. Would any of the head teachers like to come in before we wrap up? Okay. John, do you want to answer both those then before I bring members in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will do so. Certainly the transport issue came up frequently, and we did have a very detailed analysis of transport routes, times, locations, etc. In a group of respondees from CCYD. So that was very clearly put forward by them. I think whereas people cope with the school bus down the valleys to CCYD and home again of an evening, the idea of them moving on from there to a more distant sixth form centre was obviously something which they were concerned about, and particularly the length of time of travel. I think the notion that we would have to rely on public transport, either trains or buses, is something we might need to set aside. In other words, a bespoke service. If we're going to go in any of these sort of routes and mergers, I think you'd need a bespoke transport service to go with it, so that you can have it as reliable and as fast as possible. And certainly reliability just on purely public transport, not always a great feature. So that was one of the issues. The transport to Twilight was mentioned there, and indeed there are about 200 learners who travel down to Bridgend College every week for a group of A-levels which we put on in the Twilight, and we put them on down in the college at that time because they are, if you like, a specialist provision which are not normally available in the school's ordinary daytime curriculum. It does have bespoke transport, so there is a proper bus picking up the youngsters at 4 o'clock or before 4 o'clock to take them down to the college at 4 o'clock and returning them from the college at 6 twice a week. It's a popular option. In fact, there's the Twilight offer at the college is a more popular option than daytime collaboration in terms of volume of learners. So I think it says two things. Students will travel for good provision, provided you've got a good infrastructure in terms of transport. But obviously, if you had larger sixth form hubs, then you expand the choice of subjects in those hubs, and you therefore may not need to travel for things like Twilight in the future. So there's a balance to be struck there. And that's picked up really by Megan's point about the response from Porthcawl, where larger classes, a larger sixth form, a wider choice in the curriculum, all have benefits. And indeed, we see in larger sixth form settings a tendency towards, well, not a tendency, an actual greater curriculum provision and offer than you would get in smaller sixth forms. Our smallest sixth form might offer, say, 12 to 14 subjects on the timetable, whereas in our larger settings that might be 28 subjects on the timetable. So there is a big difference in that. And the interesting feature about size is that larger classes, and we're not meaning huge classes, but where classes are, say, 15 to 18 in size as opposed to 5 to 8, we see actually higher standards, generally speaking, in those, because there is a greater interaction between students, and it seems to push standards up. So I think there's a point well made there that larger settings are not, there are advantages that can be had from those settings. The opposite point is the next one that was made from the config student about the central location, and if that individual had to travel to a central location, they just simply wouldn't have gone to sixth form. I suppose the only parallel we can look at there is we need to refer to the fact that only about 50% of our year 11 cohort go on to the sixth form. The rest will stay going on to college, and there is only one college, and they all have to travel to college to get there and settle in and meet new people, new faces, new lecturers, new environments. And that 50% of youngsters usually contains the most vulnerable youngsters in the borough, the ones that have not attained good GCSE results, don't qualify for entry to the sixth form. And yet we can see quite clearly over recent years our NEETs figure in Bridgend has dramatically dropped. So we know that if you've got the right courses, the right provisions for these youngsters, that central settings and the travel to get there does not mean that they will disengage, because the evidence is quite the opposite. In fact, we have a higher level of engagement now than we've ever had in the last 10 years. So there are perceived and well taken, well meant perceptions of how people may cope with the transition to a new setting against how we actually see the results on the ground at the moment. Again, the notion of personal tutors, I think, that frequently comes up. There's a relationship with staff, be it the subject teaching staff or the personal tutors and their UCAS experience. We have a lot of tutors in our schools who've got a wealth of university applications experience, and clearly it's important that we don't lose that. So in any of these options, we do not throw our sixth form tutors out and say you no longer work with our students. We will actually be making sure that they are still part of the system, and youngsters will still have access to them. In some cases it'd be existing tutors, but in some other cases it might be tutors that are new to them, but they would still have that provision available to them.
Okay, thanks. I've got a number of members who want to come in, so can I ask the questions to be as brief as possible, as well as the answers? And I know a number of officers probably want to answer questions as well. So can I start with David White, please, Councillor David White?
Thank you, Chair. I've been contacted by a couple of people in my ward who go to Bryn Tyrion School, right? And they're asking questions like, if in the future the schools wanted to merge, Bryn Tyrion and Bryn Teg, would this be possible? Maybe the director or the cabinet member can answer that question.
Yeah, does the cabinet member want to come in? I know.
Yes, okay. Let me just get my camera on. Right. Obviously, that question appears to be motivated by that bullet point, which mentions a possible future merger between the sixth forms of Bryn Teg and Bryn Tyrion. I'd just like to remind people I've got to be careful not to prejudge the cabinet meeting, which occurs in 2 weeks' time, but there is a recommendation there for cabinet that they adopt option 3, which means the schools retain their sixth forms. The reason why that bullet point concerning Bryn Teg and Bryn Tyrion is there, I suppose, is to keep a future option open should it be required. We don't know how far down the line that would be, and lots of other things will change in the meantime, including changes in the geographical distribution of population throughout our counties. So I don't see that bullet point as a policy as such, or even as a commitment. It's just a future option if required. And as far as I'm concerned, and I'll dare to speak for my cabinet colleagues, as far as the cabinet is concerned, as far as this current administration is concerned, any sixth form merger between Bryn Teg and Bryn Tyrion would be on a voluntary basis. It wouldn't be forced by council policy. So if I say that as clearly as I can, I hope that might settle some people who are feeling unsettled about that particular bullet point. Maybe Lindsay ought to come in as well.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Chair, if I may?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, so nothing really further to add to what Councillor Smith has said. Obviously, that is not a proposal in the short to medium term, but to answer the question directly around whether or not schools have the facility to do it in the longer term, well, clearly one thing we are looking for is better partnerships between schools. And if there is a benefit, and the governing bodies and the teachers in that school and the pupils in that school must see the benefit, well, obviously that we would broker discussions between the two. But as Councillor Smith said, it would be very much to do with the benefit of the schools involved and at the request of the governing bodies and pupils.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay and Councillor Smith. Ken Watts, please. Could you come in next?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Apologies for not being there this morning, and maybe my point has been put before some members already, but I just wish to bring up the issue of virtual learning or online learning. In the report at 4.6, it says about blended learning that it has changed the whole perspective of how learning can be delivered across Wales. And John, you said earlier about the blended learning, tremendous interest, and it must come forward and play its part. So my question is really, can we, as a council in the interim, because we have to wait for the LDP report to come forward, to consider what needs to be built and where, or what mergers are beneficial. So obviously there's going to be some time before a decision can be made, but during that time, is it possible to look at the option of having virtual sixth form colleges, so that students can not have the need to travel long distances and at different times and on different buses, thereby saving the county that amount of money to some extent. And I'm sure there's a whole gambit of ideas that could come forward from virtual learning to the benefit of all. So my question is, are we going to be looking at this as a possibility, as an option in the future? Thank you.
Okay, Don and Charles want to come in, I think, to answer that. I'm assuming it was directed at John, Ken. Yeah.
Yes, well, both actually. You're quite right. Both. Thank you.
Do you want me to come in first on that one?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've always had the blended learning as a component of the review, right from the early days, in fact. And I know Councillor Charles Smith has been quite keen to see how that can be represented. But I think the recent experiences have certainly driven that significantly up the agenda, because we've seen large swathes of students at all age groups engaged in online and distance learning. Now, whether it's, I'm not advocating here that we suddenly go whole scale across to that type of learning for all sixth formers, but I certainly feel it has a part to play. And where you have small scattered groups of students who want to do a single subject, so you've got 2 students in one school, 3 in another, 2 in a third, and so on, to certainly use this as one of the techniques of delivery would make a lot of sense. It hopefully would be more cost effective. It would certainly cut out the transport. Youngsters are certainly more than capable of benefiting through this. And so what I was really looking at in this is to create an expert group who would develop, if you like, the best approaches that we can bring in from the experiences recently into this sixth form provision and see how it can play its part. So yes, I think it will be a component going forward.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Smith, do you want to come in?
Yes. I would actually put it more strongly than that. It's not just a component. I think it will be an integral part of education, certainly at 16 plus. And as we've seen in recent weeks and months throughout the system, as John says, I've been very keen from the very start of this process to get blended learning inserted as at least a component. I think Councillor Watts' idea of a virtual sixth form centre has got a lot of merit. If ever we do have some big town centre educational presence in cooperation with further education and higher education, which is our ambition, I think it wouldn't necessarily be a teaching centre in the sense of a place with lecture halls and lots of chairs and desks. It would be a communication centre which would coordinate blended learning. I think what the COVID experience has done is it's given this a boost in schools. It was already there in universities. Our sixth formers, when they get to university, will find that this is as natural as anything. So I think we've got a certain amount of catching up to do. We need to invest in the equipment. But most of all, we need to invest in teaching skills, because teaching via blended learning isn't just a case of doing your normal lesson and sticking a camera in front of yourself. There's a whole pedagogy and a whole methodology to be learned. So I know this now is a major interest of Welsh Government. It's a major interest of Central South. consortium. It's a major interest of our team Virgin, and just 2 weeks ago Lindsay hosted a meeting of school leaders where we had a expert from Ceredigion. Now Ceredigion and rural places in Wales are very used to small, in inverted commas, unviable classes. We got a really good insight from Dr. Lanigan in that session. I want that session repeated with chalk-faced teachers as soon as possible. If we take this on and take it on systematically, what it does is it renders redundant a lot of those worries we had about transport, because it means instead of travelling around the place, we are communicating around the place, which is much more time efficient. And as we've been shown by the instances that Dr. Lanigan showed us, it can be a really worthwhile and rewarding educational and social experience as well. So I think if my colleagues on the Cabinet support option 3 in 2 weeks' time, it goes without saying that the other bullet point, which deals with building up our expertise and our capacity for blended learning, is an integral part of that choice.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Tim Thomas, do you want to come in?
Oh, sorry about that, Chair. A couple of technical problems. Yeah, thanks, Chair. It just seems to me that with the COVID-19 pandemic, I think teachers, parents and pupils have had enough disarray. So it just seems to me a common sense approach would be to remain with the status quo, at least certainly for the time being. Now, while I welcome the possibility of improved sixth form at Coleg Medal of Verwyn, which is in my ward, I'm also a governor there, I did have specific reservations, particularly for that school, and that's possibly why there's been so much opposition from parents from that school. I won't repeat my concerns because I think it was Megan already summed them up. I was concerned about transport times, really, with kids having to travel as early as 7 o'clock and effectively have to travel past the school that they previously went to, which sounds crazy to me. But on to blended learning, I agree with previous members with their comments. I think it's a very useful tool. Particularly, I hope it would be restricted for sixth formers, because at the end of the day, sixth formers want to be there. They want to be educated. I'd be very concerned if it was used below sixth form. But I do wonder how pupils from particularly vulnerable backgrounds will be supported with blended learning in terms of having the equipment, maintenance, etc. My second question was on Welsh medium provision. I respect the fact that Welsh medium schools aren't part of the equation for sixth forms, but my understanding is there's an expectation that Ysgol Llangynoed and Llanharry will have to work in greater partnership, and I just wondered what that will look like. Thanks.
Okay, is that for John or?
Yeah, go on then.
Okay, I'll come in on a couple of bits there, and then maybe Lindsay wants to come in as well. Picking up on the Welsh medium side of things, yeah, I think in the option 3 and the bullet points that we're suggesting are some of the moves that are afoot to build on where we are at the moment. Those would apply to Llangynoed and Llanharry as well. We've spoken with RCT and our colleagues up there, and they are quite happy to look at a more formal arrangement between the two schools. The idea of having the memoranda of understanding is to try and make sure that any partnership and collaboration you put in place has a sense of survival, if you like, that it's not at the whims of any individual or school or institution to suddenly pull out of arrangements at short notice, but it actually gives some longevity to it. It provides the commitments are all set out very clearly as to how the partners would operate, and if any partner wishes to withdraw, you have to give a periods of notice, etc. So all these sort of formalized arrangements give you a much more secure system of our partnership and collaboration than we currently have at the moment. And I think it's that we would be looking for from the English medium sector, but also equally applying it to the Welsh medium sector. And I think RCT are content that it should be an intergovernance arrangement. In other words, the governing bodies of the two schools agree that memorandum of understanding and the arrangements, rather than an interlocal authority agreement. So that is, and that's how I would tend to see it as well. It's the agreements between the institutions which are critical, but actually formalising and securing those terms, so that there is a real sort of firm and concrete base for the partnership and collaboration to go forward on.
Thanks, Chair. Do you want me to come in on the blended learning question?
Great, yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Thomas. So first of all, so with respect, I would certainly not restrict it to sixth form. I see blended learning as being a key component across learning. I think the key thing is this is about blended learning, not online learning. So blended learning by its very nature means a combination of face-to-face physical and online virtual. So I certainly wouldn't limit it to sixth form, and we've got primary head teachers who are here at the moment on this site that will give you excellent examples of some of the fantastic work that's gone on with younger learners. I think there's a couple of key things here, I think, as far as making the blended learning offer successful, however. First of all, picking up on Councillor Smith's first point, is around developing pedagogy. Now, that's the ability to teach in a blended learning environment, which is very much different to face-to-face. So that's something we would need to look at. I believe it's important to look at developing guidance for parents and carers as co-educators, and certainly from today, probably more grandparents as well, just to make sure that they're involved in support. I'd also consider us to look at whether we can develop our non-digital, our analogue resources to complement digital learning, which I think that's really important. And finally, I think it has a place with regard to catch-up in certain years. So I think there's a number of issues there that I think would be, very beneficial, not just for sixth forms. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Thomas.
Okay, and I think the Youth Mayor, Megan Lambert, wants to come in to answer Councillor Thomas's point as well.
Yeah, I agree completely with Lindsay Harvey there. I did part of my university application, and there's a lot more blended learning, and it would have been so much more useful for me if I had done a lot more of that, and I'd say even starting year 9, 10 and 11. Yeah, it's bridging that gap really, and just making the transitions from each key stage going a lot easier. So I totally support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alex Williams, do you want to come in?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks very much to John for his presentation. From my perspective, the same theme appears throughout all the different consultation responses which we've had over recent years. And time after time, each learning centre seeks to protect its own sixth form existence, with very little thought of looking at the strategic vision for the county as a whole. So as a result, if we keep asking the same question, are we not bound to get the same answer? So while the status quo seems to be the preference for the short and medium term, the financial reality for the local authority is that a long-term solution will have to be found at some point, and there will be winners and losers. For example, you mentioned Pencoed Comprehensive, and that is in the area which I represent. They have a tried and tested example after having established a successful sixth form partnership with Bridgend College. So do you see this as a potential long-term model which can be rolled out across the county borough? Thank you.
I think the Cabinet member wants to answer that one. Charles?
Right, a couple of points there. The Pencoed case is a special case. That's a case of collaboration between the sixth form at Pencoed and the college. It's a very good collaboration. When we visited and observed the collaboration, we specifically put it to the principal could this be scaled up for the whole county? And his reply was no, that it is a specific collaboration. If it was scaled up, it would be the sixth form college model, which public opinion has previously ruled out. That was one of the concepts earlier on, and it just didn't float with the public. The other thing I need to address is the fact that Alex is talking about the status quo. Now, there's no way that option 3 is the status quo, and I think we've tried to make that pretty clear. Schools can't carry on with sixth forms as they are. It's not a budgetary target. We are not chasing a particular sum of money, but we do need classes to be viable. And as John said earlier on, a class of 6 or 7 isn't viable. A class of 30 or 40 isn't viable educationally. There is a sort of a sweet spot around the 15, 16, 17, 18 mark. Any sixth form teacher will tell you that. So what we are saying to sixth forms is that we want you all to keep your sixth forms, because this is what we would be saying if we adopted option 3. I've got to keep in mind that we haven't made the decision yet. But what we would be saying to head teachers is you can keep your sixth forms, but it won't be the status quo. It will mean some massive changes in terms of common timetabling, common curriculum, collaboration. That would be the most important thing of all, and it would be based around an upgrade to the Twilight learning offer. It would also very heavily around blended learning. I'm about to be signed out, so with that message, I'll see you in 5 or 6 minutes' time.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Councillor Janice Lewis is next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering if I've...
You can hear you, but I can't see you.
I can't see me, but there we are. Oh, I'm a photo. What it is, I think it's for John, I believe. It's what he said about the planning application for extension to Coleg of Erwen. I just want to know where on the plan would the building be, because obviously it will be a new build, because quite a few of the classes have been taken over. I just wanted to know where it would be, and he said that the stakeholders were involved. Exactly whom were the stakeholders? Thank you, Chair.
One for John then.
Thank you, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis, for that question. Yeah, in the responses that we got from a range of stakeholders from CCYD, which included governors and teachers and community leaders, many of them sent in copies of the original planning submission for CCYD. And in those plans, there is an area marked out. I'm trying to... If you look at the old main entrance, it's somewhere up to the far right-hand top corner of the site. Behind there is an area marked out for expansion. So they were pointing out to us that, if the school could accommodate a larger proportion of pupils, given the pressures that we see in that area in years to come, that would enable them to have a larger sixth form and perhaps a viable sixth form, but they could actually do that on site through the extension of putting a new wing basically onto the building, and it was there marked on the original plans that were put in. So it seemed only reasonable to respond positively to that those pieces of information for that particular school.
Okay, next up is, I feel like a radio DJ doing a phone in. Next up is John Paul from Kevin Glass.
Thanks, Chair.
No, it's me.
Yeah, it's Nicole. That's what I was going to say.
Oh, sorry, I wrote it down differently to how I typed it. I do apologise.
That's all right.
If John Paul wants to go first, that's fine.
You were next anyway, Nicole. Don't worry.
I can't get my camera on now. Right.
So who's going first? Do you want to go?
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of points and a question. I mean, a lot of them have been discounted now if it seems to be in favour of option 3, but I did have concerns that if any school was to lose its sixth form provision, I was more concerned not about the difference with people allocating to leave the school that didn't have the sixth form, but I was worried about the pressure it was going to put on to feeder schools to the school that was going to maintain its sixth form, because a lot of parents' familiarity and continuity of education was really important, and I felt that they were going to make that decision very early on and elect to send their children to a feeder school of the secondary school that was going to maintain its sixth form. But if it's option 3, then that seems to be discounted now. I did want to make a point about blended learning, however. I am concerned that some A-levels are students are not choosing to take modern languages, and that we need to be doing more rather than just providing choice and more choice for students. We need to be doing more to encourage them to take different options at A-levels. And as part of our globally responsible Wales and looking further afield, it's really to make a plea that we don't just look to our local and regional schools, that we look to making and forming relationships with schools throughout the rest of the world, really, so that we encourage our children and they see the benefits of electing for modern languages and broaden their horizons, so that by the time they get to A-level and choosing their options, they're comfortable in their choices then.
And who did you want to answer that? Would it Lindsay? Is it?
Probably Lindsay.
Lindsay?
No problem. Let me just get there you go, back on. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And as far as modern foreign languages are concerned, you're talking to a recipient who benefited from it. I did French A-level. I went to live in France for a year. So, you know, it was a fantastic experience for me. Brilliant experience all round, and certainly as a gap year, it was fantastic. But I think when we look at the blended learning aspect, I remember looking back when I was in A-level, and I remember looking at a textbook. Well, if you can imagine what it's like with blended learning now, somebody who's encouraged to do French, for example, or German, or another a modern foreign language, they could be sitting there with a VR headset, fully immersed in a market, for example, talking to someone who's selling vegetables, and talking with that person as a fluent speaker. So blended learning opens up a wide range of possibilities. But you're absolutely right, Councillor Burnett. We've got to sell subjects like modern foreign languages. I think that it's a very important part of the curriculum, and clearly one of the things that we're seeking to do, if Cabinet agree option 3, is to have far better collaboration across the board to make sure where there are this excellent practice across Bridgend, all learners can benefit from it.
Okay. Councillor Blundell then.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just get my camera up. Obviously, one of my main questions was about Bryn Terrain and Bryn Teg, so I want to thank the Cabinet member for his intervention on that and saying that it would be voluntary. So I think that in the report, I think if it does go ahead, that should be made clearer, just so everyone understands. My main question, one of my questions is what is meant by short and medium term? Obviously, it was never going. If this option 1 or option 2 was ever going to go ahead, it was never going to be next year or in 2 years. It was always going to be in a few years' time. So I just wonder what is meant by short and medium term in the long run. That question first, please.
Do you want me to come in there, Chair?
Yeah, okay.
Well, in the short term, we're looking obviously at the next couple of academic years as the short term, so 2019, 2020, 2021. Most of the arrangements are already in place for September 20 starts. So the organisation, the timetables, curriculum choice are all in place. So in terms of moving option 3 forward, then we'd be looking at a lead-in, which is about a 12-month lead-in, from now to September 21 to a different pattern of arrangements, maybe different types of timetable, etc. That allows us to takes us through to 2022. by which point, some clarification around things like the local development plan, the capacity of secondary schools may come into play. But I would envisage that any other changes would not be for 3-4 years, maybe. Perhaps Lindsay would want to give a view on that longer term view once the other decisions are in place and the view, if you like, forward is a bit clearer.
Okay, Lindsay, did you want to come in there?
Thanks, Chair. The delay is switching everything back on, so apologies. It's very difficult to be specific about what we mean by the longer term, because again, as John said, it'll be subsequent to many other decisions and to see how the next couple of years pan out. Now, as John has said quite rightly, there's a number of areas that we would seek to improve, or we already have improved very recently. So we continue that improvement journey across our sixth forms, and also we would see how the collaboration activity really blossoms, and we see some really good work at the moment on that. So it certainly, as John has indicated, Councillor Brunel, it certainly wouldn't be in the immediate future.
Okay, sorry, and I know the cabinet member wanted to come in response to Nicole's point, but I left him out at the time, so I'll bring him in now.
Thank you, Chair. I'll say something about long-term and short-term first. I think it's perhaps unfortunate we've got into using those phrases. I don't often look at it, but I did happen to see the Oggy Bloggy blog yesterday, where the headline was Bridgend likely to save its sixth forms, but just for now. And I think that's an unfortunate image to put out there. As far as I'm concerned, and I guess as far as the Cabinet is concerned, is if we go to option 3, that isn't an interim solution. That is a permanent solution, insofar as anything can be permanent. It's a solution we are committed to for the foreseeable future. And we would want commitment from governing bodies, from parents, from teachers and from school leaders on option 3 if we go for it. So I don't want, by using the term, if you see what I mean, by using the phrases short term and long term, I don't want people to think that option 3 will just be something for now. This will be something we'll be working with for quite a long time, until sometime in the future. When we get to that sometime in the future, I'm guessing that we will have chosen the correct option, mainly because of the blended learning aspect, because I think that's the way things are going to go in the long term, and I hope to live long enough to see them. Coming back to modern foreign languages, not forgetting that Welsh is a modern foreign language which struggles at A level. And again, this is, as Lindsay has indicated, this is one of the beauties of blended learning. It can make an unviable Welsh sixth form class viable by linking up with other small sixth form classes in Welsh and with other languages. I might have mentioned in passing to some people that I got an interest in Spanish, and Kenfig Hill is a great centre for GCSE Spanish, but it struggles to put on A-level Spanish courses. While we know that out there is a demand out there in the wider world for A-level Spanish. So blended learning makes Config a natural place for a virtual centre for Spanish A-level, and that's a very exciting prospect.
Okay, Councillor Blundell wants to come back in just quickly.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. One thing you've always continued to mention is the LDP, and it's great to see that education is talking into the development of the LDP. But surely we should be telling them that we can't, the LDP, that we should be proactive, not reactive. So we should be saying, right, we can't, that school there can't hold any more development, so we can't develop there until more investment is put into that school. So I just wanted to think, why are we not directing the LDP instead of the LDP directing our education system?
Okay. Any particular officer you wanted to answer that, John Paul?
Anyone who wants to answer it. I'm not a
Thanks, Chair. Do you want me to come in there?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Brundell. The one thing is, the key thing for us is that we're involved in the process. We've got some very experienced officers. I'm sure you'll be aware of Gaynor Thomas and a team, but it involved a very long-term relationship with the planners and the LDP process. So I think the key thing for us is for all members to be absolutely assured that we are a key part of that process, and obviously education is a key part of their thinking.
Okay, can I ask Canon Edward Evans to come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a lot of what I was originally going to say has already been dealt with, and I'm very pleased to hear Councillor Charles Smith talk about the future. Just a couple of points that that haven't been touched on. The first thing is the figures in the report for Bryn Tirion. There is some doubt over the accuracy of those figures as far as Bryn Tirion is concerned. So that's something that needs to be borne in mind. The other point that I would make is we've talked about children leaving schools that don't have a sixth form. The same thing would apply to teaching staff very often. Teachers enjoy teaching in sixth forms. It's part of their reason for being there. It's part of their development process. And there is a great fear that if schools were to lose their sixth form, then they'd lose good staff as well. And similarly with recruitment, the recruitment wouldn't see such a high caliber of applicants if there is no sixth form. So those are just a couple of points there. The other point very quickly is we've talked about at some point in the report about building sixth form centres and spending money to build. There is plenty of room in the on the Bryn Tirion site to build if it's argued that Bryn Tirion is already at physical capacity. So there is room to build on the site, and if there is money available to build elsewhere, then that money could also be made available to relieve the perceived overcapacity at Bryn Tirion. But the other points I was going to make, the points I made this morning, have already been dealt with, so I won't repeat them.
Lindsay, would you like to answer those?
Okay, apologies for the delay again, Chair. Just switching them back on takes a bit of time. First of all, big thank you to Canon Evans, and again, I'm grateful for many governing bodies for taking part in this review, and certainly Bryn Tirion were active in that, so I'm grateful. I suppose that there are a couple of challenges here. First of all, the report quite rightly looks at the fact that if we were going to look at future investment, there could be an argument to invest in current school sites. So I think John has made that point in the report, and it's certainly something that we are alive to. As far as Bryn Tirion is concerned specifically, that would be something that we would need to look at in great depth on whether or not we could expand the current provision on that footprint. There are challenges, as Canon Evans knows, on that site, not least the fact that the school is a busy school, and we'd have to accommodate any learners during the build anyway. So that's certainly the case as well. I think the other challenge really for us is to make sure that we capitalise, and I think John has made this point in the paper, on the excellent work the schools like Bryn Tirion have done, and to make sure we share it not on just a physical footprint, but also more widely across Bridgend. And we've got a number of head teachers in here at the moment would argue the same. They've got some really good stuff going on in their schools, and this is not about bricks, it's more about clicks, to use the common terminology. It's how we can move it outside the building, as Councillor Smith said, and how we can share it in a virtual environment.
Okay, Councillor Mike Clark.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry,
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Mike. Edward wanted to come back. I do apologise.
Right, yes. There was one point I was going to make very quickly. We talked about status quo, etc., etc., etc. Yes, there does need to be a number of changes to that. We think that if the heads of sixth forms get together and work together in clear collaboration, many of those potential problems or perceived problems could be overcome. if sixth form heads who know each other, work closely together anyway now, they could resolve a number of those issues and take it on to other forms of learning as well. Just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Okay, no problem, and I presume Lindsay's happy to do that as well. Sorry, Mike, did you want to come back?
That's okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair. I think obviously getting to this point, many things have been covered, but in terms of looking forward, I wonder what consideration has been given to sort of unintended consequences. Clearly, the focus has been on sixth form and on reorganisation, and I understand it's as much about it's not just about money. It's about improving the education in a viable way. I wonder what work has been done or could be done in the future to give the report a balance in terms of the impact on schools that lose, if you like, when I use that term, a sixth form and no longer become having a sixth form. What is the impact on that school in terms of its viability or in terms of the opportunities that it might offer the school? I do pick up again, as I did earlier, Councillor Burnett's comment about feeder schools, because although we've talked about Brintirian and others, perhaps the option 3 is there for the foreseeable future. I think it is important to bear in mind in any future development that people do act with their feet, and there would be a risk that parents would see being local to a school that has a sixth form as being something that is akin to crossing the Severn Bridge. You know, if you've got a long travel route, then it's something you have to consider for your children. From the point of view of teachers, I first of all felt that it was a negative, and I'm wondering whether there's not an opportunity, because there is an opportunity perhaps for teachers, not necessarily to be able to have a career route, but it's not necessarily about staying in one school, in one setting all the time, but it's perhaps having them, some being developed and having a more of a roving brief, and they might actually spend time down at the sixth form college, wherever it is. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, is that one for Lindsay, I presume?
Okay, thanks, Chair. So a couple of questions there. Thanks, Councillor Clark. So first of all, about the long-term opportunities, I think you're right. I think the feedback we had from the learners, very keen to see the sixth form stay, and they wanted the sixth form to stay because of the identity and community that had been built up within those schools. So I think you're right there, that there's a very clear indication they want them to remain, but obviously it's hypothetical at the moment until we have a decision from Cabinet in a couple of weeks' time on which way that's going to pan out. The other thing which is very clear, you mentioned there about opportunities for staff and progression routes, not just from a career point of view, but also from a professional learning point of view. Now, the self-improvement system, school-to-school working, has been with us for quite a few years now. It's now a mature system. We're seeing cross-school working, cross-local authority working, and I've seen some wonderful examples of international working between teachers. So we're already seeing that, and we're already feeling the benefits, and certainly from a professional learning point of view, staff are feeling it as well, and obviously a knock-on effect on the quality of teaching and learning they're offering our learners in school. So I think we are partly down the road on a lot of this. Obviously there's still work to do, but again, Chair, I don't know whether you want to bring some of the head teachers in specifically to comment on that question to see if they concur with what I've just said.
Yeah, great. I don't know if any of the head teachers wanted to come in and follow on from Lindsay. Yeah, Andrew Slade wanted to come in. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you. Getting back to the points that have been made, I support all of them. Lindsay's opportunity for inter-school development is one we talked about only this morning in a different forum. We're keen to move teachers around, we're keen to move ideas around, and I am very much sold on the concept of blended learning and the CPD, the continuing professional development, in the pedagogical approaches to developing that. one of the things that C19 has brought us is a very, very sharp and very quick focus on the opportunities of remote learning and distance learning for children. And it's one strategy that we are quite keen to develop going forward. And it sits coincidentally perfectly with large elements of option 3 and a commitment for schools to work together to strengthen partnerships and ultimately offer a bigger range of subjects and a greater quality of opportunity to children. That's how I see it, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mike, did you want to come back?
Yes, only one other point. Thank you for the comments. And that was, I've listened carefully as well to the contribution that's been made by our student guests. And I'd like to urge them to be able to have more say in the way in which the future of this provision is developed within Bridgend County Borough. I think they've got a lot to offer, and there were some very sensible proposals and level-headed proposals that came forward.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Councillor Dendy then is next.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few points and questions, really. One of the things that we mentioned about pupil numbers and how many were going, how many predicted. I know that was like a bone of contention with a couple of schools, and I was just wondering whether there was anything wrong with the figures that were used, and what the problem was, and whether that was resolved. I was also wondering, with the blended learning, I understand that it seems to be really positive from both pupils and teachers' sides, and seems to be working well. But do we have anything in terms of the results that the students are getting? Are they like positive results in actual terms of their grades within education? Is that actually benefiting them? I think that's something too important to look on, although it might look and feel good if the results academically aren't there. I think that's one of the issues. Going back to the blended learning, and we've talked a lot about modern languages and the fact that this and a virtual part of the course would be good. You also and about schools working with each other. I know when I was in school, I couldn't do GCSE French because I was the only student who wanted to do it. But when I got to A level, I got to go from my school in Nostalgia to Puthcall to go and study that. Now, when it to go and do drama. Now, if it's one of the STEM subjects where you might need to have a laboratory, where you need to go and do all the work there, or it's something like a creative, practical things, they can't really be used as blended learning online. So will the cooperation between schools also include pupils travelling to and from other schools in order to be able to do those subjects and have them cross over? My last point I want to make is talking about the expansion and the capacity at CCYD and also building, which I know is in the plans. But I was also wondering if in consideration for that as well was whether the hub that is based in CCYD would be considered moving. And it was taking up quite a lot of classroom space there, and that could be something of, a more cost-effective short-term approach until the development could be done. Sorry, I know that's a lot, so apologies for that.
Problem. I know the cabinet member can answer one of them, and perhaps Lindsay can sweep up the rest.
Yeah, I can come in specifically on Councillor Dendy's point about having to attend classes. Yes, the whole point of blended learning is that we're saying it's blended, not totally online. The experience from Cardigan and other professionals is that some of the subjects you might think of as being impossible for blended learning actually turn out to be more suited to it. In the early stages, when you're introducing this to teachers for the very first time, what we've heard is that teachers will say, oh yes, we can see the value of blended learning for every subject except the one that I actually teach. So that's your starting point. There's some sort of skepticism there. But after a bit, when you get into the methodology of it, there's a lot more enthusiasm. I'll give you a very quick personal anecdote. My son has just been appointed to a new post. My son, I'm stressing my son for a reason you'll find out in a minute, is now the blended learning manager for the Royal College of Midwives. Now, obviously, only a certain amount of stuff to do with giving birth can be theoretical. Some of it you've got to get real practical. But if an organisation as august and as important as the Royal College of Midwives sees a role for an important role for blended learning in their curriculum, I'm sure we can cope with design and technology at GCSE, etc.
Okay, and I know John Fabes was to come in and answer some of the other points Sorrel raised.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the results, does blended learning produce results? Certainly, I think there's indications of that. The Further Maths programme in Wales has now, supported by Welsh Government, has moved to a completely virtual online delivery. And they are quite confident that results are holding up there. Some years ago, I worked with schools that ran a suite of online A-levels produced by Strathclyde University in science subjects. Students would study these in addition to their normal A-levels, and the online resources were available 24/7. And for those who engaged in those additional resources online, they secured a full grade advantage in their A-levels compared to those who didn't. And that is a very significant increase in standards. With regard to your question about data, we were very careful about our data. Most of the questions were raised about primary catchments and where students from primary schools were moving across secondary catchment boundaries. And in fact, the data that we use from Gaynor Thomas's 21st Century Schools team draws on historical data. So we don't look at what the primary numbers are and just extrapolate them up to the secondary. We look at what is the historical transition of the primary students to the various secondary schools. And we have that tracked back over many years now. And so we use actual transfer data rather than theoretical transfer data. So we think that the data was as robust as we could make it. And with regard to the hub, I mean, Lindsay might want to come back on this, but a comment from Gaynor about the hub is that CCYD was built as a community school. That was part of the planning remit. And therefore the hub, in fact, is part of that initial planning remit. And so it may not be easy to extract the hub from the school and replace it with classrooms, because it was designated as that under the original planning permissions. So it may be that the extension is a better route than movement of the hub.
Okay, Lindsay, did you want to come in quickly and just?
Thanks, Chair. Very quickly, just to agree with John's last point. Councillor Dendy, as you know, we've discussed the hub with the school. It provides a vital service. There's a fantastic multi-agency approach coming up to that hub, and I would have to be convinced strongly that would need to be removed, because I think it provides a very good service there, and additional expansion, as John has indicated, I think would probably be better served by more external expansion.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. Councillor Tom Beadle is next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just briefly, put my video on here. My point I wanted to raise was I'm quite concerned that the attendees at today's meeting, because we got two important subjects to debate as part of the scrutiny. I looked at the Llinby Valley, because here in my state we got 10 schools, and out of those 10 schools, the only school that seems to be on the invitee list is the head teacher from Ysgol Gylfaen Gymraeg Llangonnoed, which wouldn't be directly impacted on our post-16 education and our learner transport. And as I say, we've got 10 schools, and my state school is a hub, as you well know. We've got 6 primary feeder schools here, as well as at Paith Primary, and we've got the Welsh Primary, and of course we got the Welsh secondary school. So I'm a little bit underwhelmed at the invitees and why that invitee list is so short, when we got such an important area where my stake account for the majority, or should I say about 20% of the pupils within the old borough. So that was a point I wanted to raise.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. I'll answer this, and maybe Meryl and Councillor Green might want to come in, because we had a prior discussion as both the chairs and the scrutiny team, and what we tried to do as best we could was to get a kind of geographical mix as best we could across the whole county borough, as well as looking at Welsh medium schools and faith schools and all the things. So that's kind of where the rationale, if you like, for the invitee list comes. I don't know if Councillor Green wanted to add anything to that in particular, or Meryl. Nope. Okay. All right. Well, I hope that.
Chair, you know, when we talk about strategically placed, and unfortunately, I reiterate the point that the Welsh secondary school is not impacted on the post-16 education, which we are discussing today, and the same with learner transport. I mean, that is the issue, and they should have been part of the invitees.
Okay. All right. Well, very happy to take that on, Tom. Sorry, I'm just looking at the whole list here. As you can see, there's a balance really between having a lot of schools participate and kind of not, you know, having sort of too many, if you know what I mean. So, you know, we tried to balance it out as best we could across, like I say, geographically and Welsh medium. But I will take your point about my stake. Right. Next up is Carolyn Webster.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some questions around blended learning, if I may. I appreciate that there's a good time to look for good examples and good methods with C19, just you know, with that whole experience. But there has been some evidence, if you'd excuse me, from the University College of London Institute of Education, which threw up some very interesting studies around Welsh education. So I think if the further investigation about blended learning goes down, I would certainly welcome that this borough looks outside of Welsh borders to see good practice and to see what was going on in England, which showed better examples than what the previous college gave examples of. But I'm also interested to find out about children with ALN who go to mainstream schools and who would be part of that sixth form cohort. Now, there is evidence about girls in particular who display ASD at the age of 14 because the ability to copy it becomes more evident there. But also, children with ASD will copy when it comes to learning, and I think that might be a challenge going forward if there is more learning by an individual at home. And I want to know what researchers if that's come across anybody's radar just yet with regard to pursuing that line of inquiry before we go any further. And just another quick note about that the pedagogy of blended learning, is this an ambition of WAG? Because I can't find anything online about this kind of method of teaching coming through Welsh Government. And I'm just wondering, with regard to CPD and funding, whether it's going to be local, whether it's going to be just as part of Central South Consortium, or whether it's going to be directed from Welsh Government.
Okay, is that for Lindsay or Charles? Or?
I think there's a bit of everyone in there. I think there's some for Central South, something for Lindsay. I think there's something for Councillor Smith. I think it's something for
Councillor Webster. Do you want me to kick off, Chair?
Go on, you carry on, Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Webster. Really good points. I'll just cover off a few of those. First of all, do we look further afield? First of all, as Councillor Smith indicated earlier, we've had an expert in from Ceredigion to share the example. So that's a Welsh example. We're also working with the GLOW project in Scotland. So we're working wider there. And interestingly, one of the work we're doing with Central South Consortium at the moment is, members might recall, if you cast your mind back about 9 years ago, there was the tragedy of the earthquakes in New Zealand. And after that adverse event, there was a number of activities that were undertaken in Christchurch around supplying emergency blended learning in place. So again, it's much further than just Wales. We're looking globally and we're looking historically at some of the best examples. The second question around assistive technology. So for members who are not aware of assistive technology, this is technology to support learners with additional learning needs. Councillor Webster is absolutely right. There is a particular challenge around some learners with particular additional learning needs and how we support those. Interestingly, as you're imagining, we've worked very closely with Heronsbridge and Ysgol Bryn on this, and also working with SWASH, the South Wales Association of Special Heads. So we've worked very carefully on making sure that the offer we have in place, it meets whenever possible their needs. And in a lot of cases where there's been issue of kit that's necessary, we've deployed via a Welsh Government grant a number of devices and MiFi devices to provide adequate broadband across the borough. Now, my last figure, I believe, is about 570 people, learners across Bridgend have benefit from this. So a really positive approach by the council. Now, the last one, you talk about Welsh Government policy. I've got a rough idea on this because I led on it when I was in Welsh Government since in 2011. So yes, there has been a policy. This is to do with the Hub and Learning Digital Wales platform. So that's been in play now for about 8 years. And more recently, and it's a document that I'm quite happy circulating via Andrew to members, Welsh Government have recently published a synchronous and asynchronous, so live streaming document for local authorities to use. And this was followed up 2 weeks ago by an excellent blended learning piece of guidance that's come out of Central South. So what I can do, Chair, I'm quite happy circulating both of those around everyone later.
Okay. I don't know if the cabinet member or the representative from Central South Consortium would like to come in.
Chair, are you happy for me to contribute at this point?
Yeah,
Yeah,
great.
go ahead. That's Andrew, is it?
Yeah, it's Andrew Williams, Central South.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Just to pick up on Lindsay's point there was a national working party put together across the 4 regions, including officers from Welsh Government, around developing a national model for blended learning, and there were several models within a national approach. In Central South, a number of our staff did an Open University course around effective blended learning, so they looked at research from right across the Wales to draw in the best possible approaches to blended learning that they could. So we put together a really comprehensive document, and part of that document is something we've called a roadmap, because we're aware that different schools are at different stages in their approach to blended learning. So it gives schools the opportunity to be able to identify where they are and to be able to tap in to whichever point they are on that actual journey or process. One of the big pieces of work in reality that we need to do at Central South is around the professional learning around blended learning for schools. We've trained all our staff in our blended learning approach. We've also done some training with local authority staff. So I'm not sure off the top of my head whether Bridgend have requested that training, but that training is also available to local authority staff. And there's also webinars for schools to be able to access that training. One of the key things for us is to make sure that our challenge advisors are as skilled and as knowledgeable around blended learning as they possibly can be, so they can give the most appropriate support to schools. So from September, a big part of our work with schools is going to be around supporting schools to develop blended learning and to make the provision the best they can do for all their learners at school level. Estin are also doing a piece of work around the self-evaluation. So Estin are looking at how schools can best evaluate the work that they're doing and then build on that evaluation for improvement.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to come in, Charles?
Yes, please. Just very quickly. As you might have picked up from Lindsay's contribution, we've got to learn to use 2 new bits of jargon. We haven't got enough jargon in education, so we need 2 bits more. We're talking about synchronous and asynchronous blended learning. I think we need to change those terms, firstly because I can hardly say them, and secondly they don't immediately jump out and tell you what they mean. But synchronous means real-time blended learning, and asynchronous, as I understand it, means recorded blended learning. So that's when you just send out a podcast for children to work with. Synchronous is, I think, what most of us would think a blended learning classroom looks like, is you're there in real time working together. A lot of the guidance that's gone out so far has been to do with safeguarding and dealing with vulnerable people, and I think that's important. First things first, we've got to get those basics right. You know, there are dangers if a teacher and a young person are in one-to-one communication on the internet, but those dangers exist in real school settings as well. But it's an important consideration to get there. And then we've got what I think is a very exciting prospect of CPD, continuous professional development, learning from all parts of the UK. I'd like to mention that the Chief Executive of Central South is Irish, and her experience before coming to Wales was in a large London borough, so we do look outside the borders of Wales for expertise. I've mentioned this briefly to Lindsay, and we haven't taken this forward yet, but we will take it forward. We haven't had a festival of learning this year, but what I would like the Gen to do is to take a lead and organise a blended learning conference where we could get our chalk-faced school teachers involved as well as the school leaders and all interested stakeholders, really, just to begin to open up this this new horizon to us all.
Okay, Carolyn, do you want to come back quickly?
Yes, please. Can I ask the chair of BASH, Andrew Slade, please? I'll give him a minute just to switch on his microphone. What challenges that they had in the recent experience of it, and is it something that he thinks that would be easily acceptable within the teaching community? Just his thoughts as a teacher, really, just to
Sure, Councillor. I think everybody is receptive and open to change, and I think we need to realise we have to change to move forward. I mean, the experience we've had of supporting remote learning, from day one we had to establish Google Classrooms for every child, for every subject. It was a mammoth task, but we were able to support learning going forward. Now, we supported learning going forward, Councillor Webster, and we supported pastoral care going forward with the children. I think we now need to move to the next step as a group, as a profession, Bridgend, and I feel very confident that we can do so. I'd like to pay particular tribute to the Central South work. The roadmap document is first class. I personally find it very useful. And secondly, the 20-page document that came with it that indicated the 5 best models, again, is a way for schools to move forward. Now, talking with my BASH colleagues and the director this morning, we were thinking about using some common inset time, Councillor Webster, to get geography teachers together, French teachers together, PE teachers together to work on the best way that we can blend the learning, be it a mix of real-time or synchronous or asynchronous real-time, not real-time delivery of videos, face-to-face with the children, and some remote learning. So we are, setting off on that path now with readiness to the future. And I personally am confident, Councillor Webster, that we will have a product that we're generally proud of.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Councillor Green then is next.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Basically, what I wanted to do is to agree with Councillor Blundell on the LDP. I think that education should be advising the LDP, not the other way around. You know, it is ludicrous to say that our school's going to be overcrowded because developers want to get more money for their properties, because they want to choose the area which they consider to be high demand. That was just one thing I wanted to say. Councillor Gebby has asked me, and I'm not sure if she's back, would I ask about her question if she wasn't back? So is Councillor Gebby with us?
I don't think so. Oh, wait,
right,
yes, she's on this list. She's here.
Right. Okay, well, Councillor Gebby was referring to the wellbeing agenda and the need to have a long-term strategy that actually followed that agenda and linked with it. So I was just wondering if comments could be made that they can be conveyed back to Councillor Gebby then.
Lindsay?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Green. So I suppose 2 things here. When you read the report, there's 2 key issues here. First of all, it must be compliant, and indeed Cabinet must be compliant with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So that's clear, and that would have to be put in the report. And similarly, we must undertake inequalities impact assessment, and part of that is looking at the long-term impact on society. So from that point of view, I can assure you this is certainly something that Cabinet will be minded to do before they make a decision.
Okay. Did you want to come back, Cheryl, or you're on mute? You're on mute. Cheryl, you're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't. Sorry. No, I'll convey that back to Councillor Gebby, and I'm sure we will be revisiting the wellbeing agenda in the future with regard to this and other things. Thank you.
I've got to say, Councillor Green, if I had a penny for every time I forgot to unmute my microphone over the last 3 months, I think I'd be a millionaire. So I'm with you.
Well, I forgot. Yeah, I forgot to unmute it. My apologies. I've normally got it on all the time. Thank you.
Right, I have 2 more people who want to come in and ask questions. First, Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
Hi, mine was written in relation to the blended learning. I know we've touched on it. I mentioned at the outset, I'm a parent of a child in Bryn Teg Comprehensive. So apologies to the other schools. I'm not picking them out other than this is where my experience is, in that the work that they've given my son online has been outstanding. So I've got to commend them. And the subjects they've been able to teach them online, the teachers have put together presentations, they've put together YouTube videos, they've been able to do science experiments, they've had music lessons online, so there've been a large range of lessons. So I can see it working for younger children as well. So I wanted to touch on that because we raised it earlier. However, I think what we also need to look at is whilst at the moment I know equipment has been given to some children, it's because there's been a grant available because of the current situation. So we need to be mindful of what funding will be available going forward for all of these children to have access to Wi-Fi and to have access to equipment to enable them to do that, because I think it is a beneficial way of teaching. And also you need to look at sometimes not all parents would be happy to have their children at home if they're in work. So it's going to have to be, you're going to have to look at that element as well. So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Lindsay or Charles, did you want to come back?
I can come in quickly there, Chair. Yeah, I totally agree with Councillor Williams. And I think the word blend is important. It's not a heavy bias either way, really. And we'd have to be mindful of a lot of local circumstances, as Councillor Williams has quite rightly pointed out.
Okay. Thanks. Final question then.
If I could say just a thank you to Amanda for her praise of Bryn Teg's efforts, and I think that is a good point. And another good reason for going down the blended learning route and becoming more skilled in it is that it gives us some resilience in the future. If ever there's another pandemic or another reason why schools are closed for some time, it won't be something we're quite so frightened of getting into at that time, and we'll have expertise and lessons ready prepared for that sort of eventuality.
Okay, thanks, Charles. Final question then is from Lindsay Morris, please.
Hi, thanks. I think some of the questions may have already been responded to in previous answers, but I go through them. First query is about the proposals that have already been discussed, particularly with the option 3. Those proposals seem to be heavily based in Bridgend Town Centre or favouring the more affluent areas, which does seem to indicate that yet again some of our more disadvantaged areas are being discriminated against. Now, I assume, as Lindsay just said then, that would be something that would be discussed in the wellbeing of future generations and equality issues in Cabinet. The second point I've got then is with blended learning. Speaking as a teacher, we managed to start doing it within 2 days, which took a lot of effort to do it. My main concern with it is how much work would it take to get schools up to speed with all their IT facilities that's needed? And as well, would there be extra training for staff as well with that?
Okay, don't know who wants to come in and answer that.
Chair, I'm quite happy to answer it, yeah. So thanks, Lindsay. There's a couple of issues there. First of all, option 3 obviously is not sent. Can you hear me? I've just seen a...
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I got a bit of a blip on the internet. First of all, option 3, if Cabinet are minded to go down that route, obviously that's not central to Bridgend. That will be all sixth forms stay, so they wouldn't be centralised if that is option 3. The second point is a question around, first of all, do schools have the capacity to run this? It will be a challenge, and certainly, as Lindsay quite rightly pointed out, we were thrown into this with 3 days, about 72 hours of planning way back in March, so that was a challenge. The system is far more mature now. As far as connectivity is concerned, as far as Bridgend, certainly, all schools in Bridgend have fibre connectivity, and there's no not spots in Bridgend, so no really difficult areas where there wouldn't be broadband connectivity, so you certainly have the connectivity in place. As far as the long-term availability of resources is concerned, the hub infrastructure grant is available for the next 5 years. So in line with Councillor Amanda Williams' question earlier, that's something that we would certainly work with schools on to do that. The last point is something I think Andrew Williams from Central South has picked up earlier about long-term support for professional learning. Absolutely, it's in line with the blended learning strategy, and it's certainly an expectation of Welsh Government.
He goes without saying, Chair, I think our colleague from Central South has said that this, on the chat line, that this will be a major thrust of CSE activity in the future. And as Andrew indicated earlier on, very importantly, a lot of the training will be in the context of teaching a particular subject, which is one of those things which teachers perhaps haven't been very well supported on in recent years.
Okay. Lindsay, did you want to come back? Not Lindsay Lindsay Morris, I should say.
No, thank you. I'm reading the Central South comment there as well. Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, I know I said that one was the last one, but this is the last one, and it's Councillor Jane Gebby, please.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, can I offer my thanks to all of our education staff. They did an absolutely fantastic job at delivering hub provision for key workers across the county borough. And I think that needs to go back, because we've got plenty of head teachers here, and I know I've put it into my own schools, but I think we need to acknowledge that. I'm really quite concerned, though, about our future planning, because I don't know where we're going to be financially, where our children are going to be, how we're going to have to deliver our education. So I know that option 3 has been discussed at great length, which I agree with, but I do think a longer term solution needs to come back to scrutiny. I do think we need to start planning that. I don't think COVID's going away, and I think the reality is that we are going to have to deliver that blended learning. We've already got strictures in place now, but the impact that's going to have on children staying at home, because they won't have childcare provision, and so our parents will not be able to go to school. And I think there's also something we've got to say something about future generations. I know that John Faves made reference to it, but our future generations want to stay in their own communities, and I think we need to we appear to be centralising things more. And I've got concerns around that, only because we're very green in Bridgend. Our decarbonisation policy for Bridgend is absolutely brilliant, but we want children to be walking to schools. And if we've got problems with transport now with COVID, then I think we need to look at it longer term, and I think it needs to come back to scrutiny. But I think we're all happy with where we are at the minute, and depending on the announcements on Thursday from Kirsty Williams will depend on how our schools even open in September. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Did you want an officer to come back to it, or you happy just to? Okay, brilliant.
It might be tough and answer straight away. Yeah, okay. No, I'm not so much worried about having an answer back. I think for me, it's about we need to plan for the future. We are where we are at the minute, but I think September is going to be very telling, and I think Thursday more particularly will be telling.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, well, that I think concludes the question and answers on item 4. Thank you very much, everybody, for doing that. So before we proceed to item 5, can I nominate Councillor Cheryl Green, please, to take the chair? And could someone second that? Seconded by Councillor Dendy. So, Councillor Green, would you like to take chair?
What I'm concerned about, Tom, is I don't know what this problem that I had, what was causing it. It could go off again at any time. If my husband hadn't been here, I'd never be here now. You had to completely reinstall the hub.
I'm very happy to jump back in if you do have any technical problems, but if you want to take over now. And
yeah.
Is that okay?
Okay. All right, we're on item 5 on the agenda. I suppose at this point I would hand over to Lindsay to actually present the paper, and then we'll take questions. I do have a list of questions that have already been indicated to me this morning, and then as we go on, if anybody wants to put their names forward, just key it in. Thank you. Over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Chair. It's a swift pass of the ball, actually, to Robin Davis, who, if that's okay with you, talk us through the report.
Yeah, that's fine. Carry on.
Okay, good afternoon. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you, everybody. So I'm Robin Davis, Group Manager for Business Strategy and Performance within the Education and Family Support Directorate. And I'm responsible for the home to school transport budget and also the home to school and transport team. If I just take you through the report. So the purpose of the report is to inform the committees on the outcome of the public consultation in relation to the local authorities' home to school and college transport policy, and then for the committees to consider and agree any recommendations they may wish to make for Cabinet when Cabinet meet on the 21st of July. I provided an executive summary in the report, which I'll go through. So the report provides feedback on the public consultation, on proposals to amend the local authority's current school transport policy. The public consultation prompted just under 1,400 responses from the public and from learners, which was a very good response. The results were the result of an online survey, 10 public meetings that were held primarily in schools across the county borough, as well as several bespoke consultation meetings, events with both primary and secondary school age pupils as well. And the analysis of those survey results are presented in the consultation report, which is at the appendix 2. So 5 proposals were consulted upon. The first proposal was the withdrawal of transport for all learners benefiting from an available walking route to school in line with the statutory distances of 2 miles for primary school pupils and 3 miles for secondary school pupils. It's important to note that the policy change to those statutory distances occurred in September 2015. So the proposal is not about changing to the statutory distances. It's more aligned with the implementation of the available walk route to school. Proposal 2 then is around the removal of escorts from all taxis and minibuses with less than 8 passengers. Proposal 3 is the removal from the policy itself of specific examples of the special circumstances by which the authority will provide discretionary transport. Now, the local authority is able to provide transport to whoever it wants. In the policy, there are specific examples which the proposal aims to remove, and I'll come on to that later. Proposal 4 then relates to post-16 transport, where the proposal is to withdraw transport for learners aged 16 or over who go to school or college, but other than those who attend Welsh medium sixth forms at the school within Bridgend, or who pursue a faith-based education at a sixth form at a voluntary aided school within Bridgend. And finally, proposal 5 then is to stop providing free transport for nursery age pupils, those pupils non-statutory aged 3 and 4. And again, I'll come on to that a bit later on. So just by way of a summary, for proposals 1, 2, 4 and 5, more respondents objected to the proposals and agreed with them. Proposal 3, which is where we are proposing to remove the specific examples from the policy of the local authority's discretion. I would say that there was a clear misunderstanding of what the intention around that proposal was. I think many respondents felt that we were removing our discretion, and it's all we were trying to do is remove the examples which allowed the authority more flexibility in terms of how then it provides that discretion. Proposal 4 invoked the greatest proportion of objections, and that is the removal of post 16 and follows on from the paper that's just been presented in the discussion. And again, Appendix 2 provides much greater clarity around on the outcome of the consultation. In terms of the detail of the written responses to the consultation, I provided a summary in Appendix 3 against a thematic approach and very similar themes to the outcome of the post-16 consultation on the options. And again, I'll pick those up perhaps a bit later on. Clear connections to our corporate improvement objectives, our wellbeing objectives, helping people to be healthy and resilient, more self-reliant, and the smarter use of resources. So I'll just pick up on the background. Scrutiny has been presented this background more recently earlier this year. But obviously what we're talking about here is the learner travel budget being under significant pressure. And there have been ongoing annual reductions to the MTFS, which have provided efficiency savings of 1.79 million between 2014-15 and 19-20. There has been some budget growth, and all that is presented in Table 1. So the top half of the table shows the savings from the school transport budget, and the bottom half shows the budget growth. There has, however, been ongoing pressure in respect of the budget as a result of those savings, which has resulted in a £1.1 million overspend in 1920. And whilst there's been budget growth, which has been welcome, that's only really addressed the additional costs brought about by changes to the way that contractors charge us for some transport, some of the complexity around school transport necessitated by the needs of individual young people, particularly those with additional learning needs, eligibility as well, claims on eligibility. So the growth has supported some of that pressure, but that still means there's been still a ongoing significant overspend for many years. Additionally, and I'm on paragraph 3.3 at the moment, there are some ongoing MTFS savings expected of the school transport budget, and in 2021, under the phased implementation of learner transport policy regarding the statutory distances, there is still a saving of £75,000, bringing the MTFS total savings to £1.869 million. So in September 2015, Cabinet determined changes to the policy in order to meet MTFS savings. And that policy then, following a full year, was implemented in 2016, so a full year's grace, if you like. The initial savings that have been in the MTFS were predicated on a full change to the policy that was originally proposed, which was just to move to the statutory distances of 2 miles for primary and 3 miles for secondary. No change was proposed for nursery, so the eligibility of 1.5 miles there remains, but there was a proposal also to withdraw post-16 transport, and this is back in 2015, remember, yeah. So on implementing the policy change, Cabinet determined to protect the entitlement of children currently benefiting from home to school transport at the distances they were then eligible, and that was eligibility that would remain with them as they moved through their school. So if they were in reception year back in 2015, they would still be getting transport now at that distance they were benefiting from back in 2015. Also, their brothers and sisters, if they started at the same school, would also benefit from the same arrangement in respect of eligibility. At the same time, then, Cabinet wasn't minded to remove the discretionary arrangement for post-16 learners, and they would continue to benefit from transport from the statutory 3 miles. That's all caused quite a lot of complications in terms of how the policy is being discharged. So the in-receipt and the sibling rule has meant year on year that the number of changes to eligibility brought about by the policy for individual children and young people has been very small. So the original proposals, the MTFS savings, haven't really benefited from the change of the policy. And also, obviously, that causes a lot of inequality in the system, where you have children who don't have siblings starting school, not eligible. So you could have children in the same street, theoretically, getting transport at different distances, but maybe even in the same class, in the same school. So to address some of those issues, in July last year, Cabinet agreed to undertake a full 12-week consultation, public consultation on the bullet points under 3.7. Those were put forward as the 5 proposals I mentioned earlier, and the 12-week consultation was from October to January of this year, October last year to January this year. And we followed the approach that we have taken previously in consulting, a very comprehensive consultation with members of the public, learners, with schools, including 23,000 letters to individual children going out to individual families, notifying them of the consultation. So Table 2 then provides a summary of the impact on learners if those proposals were to be taken forward by Cabinet. And I won't go into each of the detail of each of those. I'm sure you've all looked at them, but it's a useful summary of what it actually means if, for example, you're a post-16 student in an English medium school or a Welsh medium school, if you're a nursery pupil. So just moving on past the table, just bear with me if I scroll down. Okay, it's important to note under 3.11 that learners who are ALN and of compulsory school age have their needs met within a mainstream school setting often, and we always provide transport where we feel it necessary, and they're assessed on their specific circumstances on an individual basis. So the consultation report provides full details of all the approach taken and the results. And as you can see under Table 3, the consultation responses in terms of the interactions are detailed there. Clearly, most of the interactions were via survey, but it was really good to see over 300 pupils engaging in the workshops. And we held, as I mentioned, a number of meetings in school venues and in the college over a number of sessions, and there was an excellent engagement there from the public. So in terms of the current situation under Section 4, Proposal 1, and I'll pick up on the headlines under each of the proposals rather than go into all the detail. As I say, that is contained in the consultation report. So this was the withdrawal of transport for all learners benefiting from an available walk-in route in line with the statutory distances. 57% of respondents and 76% of learners did not agree with the proposals. And that is something that we expected. I think it's quite clear that, again, with this particular proposal, there was a misunderstanding that the local authority hadn't already changed its policy as it had in 2015, and effectively what we were trying to do here was, having invested significantly in the safe route assessments across the county borough, implement those assessments with the assurance under our policy that we can provide notice of 1 terms of a withdrawal of transport where a route is assessed as available, or sometimes referred to as safe. If we speak to the public, obviously, safety is the primary consideration. Proposal 2, then, the removal of escorts. Again, some confusion. Many assumed that it included the complete removal of escorts from all vehicles, when what the local authorities identifying is the ability of drivers to act as drivers and escorts on smaller vehicles, and feedback from operators themselves. They've questioned the need of escorts in smaller vehicles. But again, just to clarify, we would consider individual scenarios where we felt that we, maybe on even a taxi or a minibus, it necessary to provide an escort. But clearly 43% of respondents and 35% of learners did not agree with that particular proposal. And again, it's important to identify that escorts are non-statutory. There is no statutory obligation on any local authority to provide escorts, but of course we must assess the needs of learners as part of our statutory responsibility, and that's why on some transport we have provided escorts. Proposal 3 then is the removal of the specific examples in the local authority's home to school transport policy of the special circumstances where we will provide discretionary transport. I mentioned earlier there was some confusion around this particular proposals. Again, many felt that we were taking something away, but what we were actually proposing was removal of the examples which in many cases constrain the local authority's ability to offer the discretion to a broader number of pupils. So those examples work against us sometimes rather than for us. But 37% of respondents and 31% of learners did not agree with that proposal either. And the 43% of respondents highlights the who are unsure, highlights the insecurity in understanding what that proposal was really about. Proposal 4 was about post-16, and the feedback was quite significant. 71% of the public responding, and more importantly, I think 85% of learners did not agree with that proposal. And there's some additional information under paragraph 4.1 about the questions we asked respondents and learners about who they believe should perhaps still receive post-16 transport if that was to be removed. And obviously disabled young people is very high up there, as are those young people in care. But this obviously was only related to those schools which were not Welsh medium or faith-based schools, because the proposal was to continue that eligibility for post-16 moving forward. Finally, proposal 5, this was to remove all transport for nursery pupils. So, as I mentioned earlier, we provide transport for all nursery pupils if they live 1.5 miles or more from their home to school, which I believe is the most generous provision in Wales. 58% of respondents and 63% of learners did not agree with that proposal. And again, the issues there were primarily about obviously the impact that has on families, the impact that has on the choice of school. Under 4.13, the community engagement workshops identify concerns in relation to safe walking routes and the distance from home to school for many. The impact on post-16 learners was a high concern, and the proposal to remove post-16 transport should be considered alongside the options for post-16 education. And I think this is why it's very helpful today that we consider in both reports, because they are material considerations in respect of each other. I won't go into the detail in respect of the EIA, but there has been one carried out previously. Full EIA will be presented before Cabinet on the 21st. The Wellbeing Future Generations Act assessment obviously identifies the issues in relation to the long-term arrangements, the preventative arrangements, etc., associated with the policy proposal. And under Section 8 then, the financial implications, I've touched upon them already, but I think the Table 4 identifies then the potential savings associated with each of the proposals, and therefore then how that might then contribute to the MTFS if Cabinet are minded to take forward any of the proposals. And therefore the recommendation is for the committees to note the contents of the consultation report, the outcomes of the consultation, to consider any recommendations it wishes to make in respect of its role in terms of challenge, and in respect of feedback to Cabinet on the 21st of July. I'll hand back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Gifford, I'm not sure if Councillor Green has lost connectivity.
I think she might have, Lindsay, looking at my list.
Sorry, I am here. I'm back now. Apologies. I tried to unmute myself and it disconnected me, so that was a happy one. Right.
Chair, I noticed that some of the head teachers have to leave in a few minutes, and whether you want to go to them next before they leave.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. Sorry, just whilst I bring myself up to speed, then would any of the head teachers like to come in on some of the subjects that have been discussed already? Sorry, Mayrick Jones, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Probably just to emphasise that the importance of the Welsh you know, we to this the importance of
sanity back.
Oh, cheers.
I can't find the slices of orange.
We haven't got any at the minute.
You used them all, did you?
No.
Jane,
Councillors, can I remind you to switch your mics off, please?
I think we're all right now. Apologies for that.
No, it's okay. And yeah, it was just the concerns regarding the Welsh medium education for primary schools is all we have in Bridgend, and the importance of ensuring that that the continuum of the transport for them at reception is one of the main importances for the Welsh language in the secondary sector as well. So that was just probably the one thing I wanted to emphasise. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you very much. Would any of the other head teachers like to come in then before we wrap up with the heads? Okay, sorry, I haven't got the speaking list up to date here, so the only one I can see.
Tom, sorry, I have to declare an interest. Andrew's advised me that I need to say it as soon as possible. Sorry.
Yeah, certainly, go on.
Thank you. Just to let members and the members of the public know that my son is educated out of county and is in receipt of school transport with an escort to get his to specialist provision. Thank you.
There are many thanks. Sorry, I haven't got Cheryl's list here, so I do apologise. So the only one I can see is, well, first of all, can I bring in Hannah Castle then, please?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invite this afternoon. Just to say, in terms of, I guess it links to the post-16, really, the concern that schools would have had with the loss of transport for post-16 learners, particularly in those areas where there's already disadvantage, and the cost and the expense of travel is something that is obviously at the forefront of lots of people's minds, because we wouldn't want to see that being a hindrance as to young people continuing their education. And I know that's something that we've spoken a lot about in the past, and that hasn't gone away, and that's still a very real issue. So just to raise that really, and also I think probably all secondary heads would be very keen for us to talk about the equality of opportunity for all learners across the borough, and wouldn't want to see any changes impacting on that level of equality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the input there. Right, sorry, so I do apologise. This order is going to be very different to the one Cheryl had, so please keep the requests to speak coming in the chat. So can I throw to Councillor Tim Thomas then, first of all, please?
Oh, there we are. Great, thanks, Chair. Yeah. Oh, let me just sort myself out. With regards to the, well, it's following on from Mayrig's point, really. With regards to the proposal to withdraw all free transport for post-16 learners, I welcome that it's acknowledged that special education, face-based education, and of course Welsh medium education should be exempt from this. But I'm still remain a little bit concerned about the impact removing nursery place transport provision could have indirectly on the Welsh language. So, for example, could this impact parents' choice in sending their children to a matron? And if this provision is taken away, the transport provision, they're more likely to send their child simply to the nearest English language nursery, and then hence once they're in down the English stream, they're more likely to remain in that, really. I just wondered if there's been any considerations on that. Secondly, I'm quite nervous about the proposals about removing escorts from taxis and minibuses. I take the point that Robin made about allowing drivers, if I got this right, drivers to be a sort of joint escort with a smaller vehicle. But I have had a series of complaints and concerns from constituents over bullying on transport going to special education schools, and this constituent was extremely anxious about sending her children on school transport in light of the social distancing measures. So I just wonder if there's any comments on that, because we're asking children here who are the least likely to comply with social distancing. So I just wonder points on that, please.
Apologies. I don't know who wants to pick that.
Yeah, happy to pick those up. Thanks so much. I think the issue about nursery education as it currently stands, I think we have identified a risk around parents potentially not choosing Welsh medium education in respect of nursery transport not being available. And I suppose it's one end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum is post-16 education. I think the risk is higher in respect of post-16 education, and that's why we are proposing to maintain school transport for post-16 at Welsh medium and faith schools, because it is about choice, and it's about a far more limited choice in terms of geography. I think what we are identifying here is that nursery education and post-16 education, it's non-statutory, and Welsh Government themselves haven't identified or provide any funding for the local authority to take forward transport for either of those as a statutory responsibility. So we've always used our discretion as a local authority, and what we've identified with nursery is far more concerned, rather than about saving money, it's about the age of the children. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old attending an English medium school or a Welsh medium school. Many of these children aren't able to travel safely, and we've identified a significant number of issues there. So what we are saying is, it's not so much about saving money with respect to nursery. We have concerns around children who are 3-year-old, 4-year-old on our buses, in our taxis and minibuses, who aren't able to get on the vehicle themselves. They're not able to do their seatbelts up themselves. Some of them should be in perhaps more better car seats fitted in those vehicles. And we've got concerns around that, and that's why we're proposing to remove nursery, rather than it's actually going to save us very much, because it won't save us very much at all, because they use the same buses as the children attending in the primary schools. We're absolutely acknowledging then that might have an impact on Welsh medium education, but we have to consider safety as our #1 priority as a local authority. And there's been far too many instances of that safety of those young children potentially being compromised by the fact that they are travelling on these much larger vehicles. In terms of escorts, I mean, what I would say about that is that, again, non-statutory, and it's not the role of escorts to intervene in any way in a vehicle. And again, it's a misconception. They are purely there to communicate to the driver who is in charge of that vehicle. And what we are saying is, if there is an instance of an element of bullying, perhaps on a smaller vehicle, then the driver will know about it as much as an escort. And there is no physical intervention of any kind. The driver's role is actually either to pull over and not to progress if that becomes a safety issue, or to report it to the school or the school transport team. So that has been a consideration. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks, Tim. Did you want to come back, or are you happy? I'll take that as you're happy.
No, that's great. That's quite a useful response. Thanks, Robin. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. I've so Cheryl's internet, I think, is a little bit dodgy, so I'm just going to take over then. I've posted the questions or the requests for questions I've been able to find in the chat. If I've missed anybody out, please let me know. But next up, bring in Councillor Nicole Burnett.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. I was following the previous list that Cheryl.
Sorry.
So I was on another call. Yes, sorry. I do have a concern that I know that Alex was also going to raise as well. I am concerned about the positive discrimination on terms of faith. Because I do feel that there are people of faith that attend schools which aren't categorised as being faith schools, and there are people not of faith that attend faith schools, and we are very particular about certain faiths, and there are lots of other faiths which aren't being considered and under this plan, who may have access to faith schools outside of the county area, as our special needs pupils are taken outside of the area. So I do have a problem with that. I also would like to ask what extra resources schools are going to be given to enable them to adapt to following active travel methods of getting to school. My children have rediscovered the joy of cycling thanks to that was one positive of the COVID pandemic, but they are reticent to take their bicycles to school because they don't feel that they would be safe there and that they can be securely stored. So would there be funds available to allow schools to adapt to active travel?
Okay, Robin?
Yeah, sorry, that delay in pressing the icon, sorry. Yeah, thanks very much for those questions. in terms of the positive discrimination in respect of faith schools, I think one of the things we have to consider as a local authority is making sure that all our schools are sustainable, and undoubtedly there will be children, pupils who will not be attending a faith school, whose faith will be very strong and practicing, in other ways. What's important is choice, and what we're identifying with Welsh medium faith schools is that there's far less of them, and because there's far less of them, they're geographically dispersed. If you remove post-16 transport from pupils attending, for example, the Welsh school up in my stake, YGG Llangynnoed, and that young person lives in Pencoed, those parents may make a decision that Welsh medium education is not in it for them because of the distance that young person would have to travel to find their own way there. The cost of that would be quite significant. So in that context, that's likely to have a significant impact on the longevity, the sustainability of those schools. There's only one Welsh medium secondary school, one faith secondary school in the county borough, and 4 corresponding primaries, Welsh medium of faith. So it's much less choice, and what we want to try to do is to keep that choice available, so to ensure all our schools are sustainable. And in terms of resources in respect of active travel, I think we've all found different walks and different cycleways that we didn't know existed in our local areas as a result of the current situation. There are grants available from Welsh Government that are administered through our Communities Directorate for active travel routes, and there's been quite significant investment over the last 18 months, 2 years, across much of the county borough. And also in schools, and there are grants available to schools for cycle racks, and some of those have gone in some of the secondary schools. And I don't know if any of the secondary heads are still online, may wish to comment about some of those facilities perhaps that they've had implemented in their own school. But we would obviously look to support any change of policy with those alternatives, and Welsh Government have been very strong, even in particular in respect of the current situation, that in parents finding their own way to school and not relying on home to school transport. Active travel has been a key theme in terms of even the COVID-19 situation and getting children to school. So it's a key message from Welsh Government, and obviously that policy is a strong policy. Active travel is a strong policy thread from Welsh Government, and we would want to support that as a local authority.
Thanks. Okay, Carolyn Webster then next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've just got a query about the perception of safety when there's an active travel route. Whose perception of safety is it? And if it's an individual parent's perception of safety, how many parents do you need to have to say that they're not, that they don't perceive a safe element to it before you act on it? But also in regard to the removal of escorts, of course, we know that statements are going to be no more with the advent of the ALM bill. So consequently, the LAA, as you said, Robin, you'll be assessing the needs on an individual basis. What I'm very concerned about is the perception that some parents already have, which is, and often it's very accurate from experience, that it's another battle that parents have to face, another battle. And, you know, sometimes that's just one battle too many. I'd like your comments on that one, please.
Okay, thanks so much, Councillor Webster. The perception of safety, obviously that is strong, and much of the challenge we've received as a local authority since the policy change back in 2015 is, you know, when there's been that proposal to remove school transport, you know, much of the challenge that comes back from parents is it's not safe for my child to walk. They can't possibly walk the route from home to school. So the investment that we made as a result of that challenge that supports the current policy proposals was to assess all the major routes from from home to school across all the county borough on the basis of the 9 secondary catchments. That followed the guidance, the statutory guidance that Welsh Government has laid out in its lunar travel statutory provision and operational guidance, which details the approach a local authority must take. Now, we followed that to the letter, and we've had to, and that included engagement, consultation with learners, with parents, at the time of the assessment, and the physical route assessment as well. Now, obviously, there will still be challenge about, parent may say, I still don't think it's safe. But I think whilst they can appeal that decision, and there is an appeal mechanism that we can, as a local authority, we consider, it's not independent, and it would be based on those assessments that have been carried out by an independent consultant on our behalf. So if those assessments say the route is safe, that would be our initial position. And then obviously we would hear from the views, and it doesn't have to be half a dozen, it doesn't have to be 100, it could be one parent who has, or one child who has those concerns, and we would follow that process. But whilst we would follow that process, that route would still be assessed as available or safe, and the two words are often intertwined, because to be available to a parent, it makes sense, therefore, that it is safe. In respect to your second point about statements, and the statements in the future will not be, the key document, the IDPs. The statement, the identification of transport in the statement was never statutory anyway. It was always in Part 6, which was this non-statutory part of a statement, and the local authority is intended not to identify the specific nature of transport, because in many respects, nothing's changed here. What we've always said, as per our statutory duty, is we must assess the needs of learners, and particularly those learners with ALN and disabilities. And whilst we have that statutory responsibility, we will continue to make those assessments and judge it appropriate or otherwise that transport then is provided for those learners. Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Robin. Councillor Alex Williams then is next.
Okay, thanks. Sorry for the delay. Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Robin. First of all, with regards to retendering of contracts and budgetary pressures, your report seems to suggest that there have been additional costs brought about primarily through the increased contractor prices. So I'm wondering what scope there is to retender contracts on a competitive basis to reduce these costs. Going back to what Carolyn said on safe and available routes and the statutory distance from home rules, it just seems absurd to me to suggest that children of primary school age can walk to school within a safe or available distance of 2 miles. So I'd like a bit more information on how the guidance defines safe and available. I think you just said that they were intertwined, but some would suggest that there's an available route, but not necessarily safe. And furthermore, in parts of the county borough, such as Pencoed or the east of the county borough boundary, we have out-of-county children from Brynner and Llanharan who attend Pencoed Comprehensive. So how will they be affected by the proposals? Post-16 learners, it just seems a bit strange that they would be deprived a place on public transport, or rather home to school transport, if they go into the same location as pre-16 learners. So I'd like some comment on that, if you may. And then building on what Nicole said, of course, we'd support the educational choice of parents and learners in opting for a Welsh language or faith education. But why is it considered a legitimate suggestion that language and faith can be treated differently from that of English medium education in the proposals? And is that so-called positive discrimination supported by relevant Welsh language legislation? And then finally, I agree with the comments in the report that the proposals have the potential to discourage those from continuing their educational journey in semi-rural locations, who are less likely to have regular bus services and which are potentially more deprived parts of our county borough. So this has the potential of exacerbating the skills gap, So what has the county borough, or what will the county borough do to conduct a wider socio-economic impact assessment of these proposals? Thanks.
Okay, Robin.
Thanks very much, Councillor Williams. In respect to contracts, just to assure you that we tender all our contracts. Some of them are tendered differently to others. So, for example, our big bus contracts are tendered differently to some of our transport, which is particularly there to support children with additional learning needs. Much of the issue around retendering contracts has been around, we ask the question, how much do you think it will cost to do the following, rather than actually say to contractors, this is how much we think it will cost us, can you provide it? And those are some of the changes that we are proposing, and also that was something that was picked up as part of our strategic review, the external strategic review of transport. And just an example of that might be a move to perhaps us being charged on a pence or pounds per mile basis, much like a taxi if you were to commission a taxi yourself. So the availability of vehicles plays an important part, and we know that many of the specialised needs of young people with ALN, some specific disabilities, means quite well adapted vehicles which are in short supply, with well-trained staff, again, which are in short supply. And we have seen increases in the numbers of those and the specialist types of provision, which is costing the local authority more as well. So, and we mustn't forget, we're in a world where we are relying on private contractors who must make a profit. And whilst we have driven down costs across a number of contracts quite significantly, others then have increased costs, and some of our contractors have had to withdraw from contracts once we've actually let them, and that's cost us even more money than what it would have done if we'd left those contracts as they were. But obviously we can't do that because we have to follow procurement rules. In terms of what is safe and what is available, I only use the words intertwined because they are, and from my perspective, the guidance says available. But as what I was trying to identify from a parent's perspective, it means safe, and their primary concern is safety. And my primary concern is safety of a child, and I wouldn't want any child to be at risk walking to school, and that's what we try to do, and that's why we have to follow the statutory provision and operational guidance to the letter, which is what we have done. And that's why it's such a key piece of work for us as a local authority that now allows us to implement the policy change that Cabinet agreed back in 2015. In terms of out-of-county pupils, there is no responsibility on us as a local authority to make arrangements for their transport. Any child can access a school place in any of our schools if they go through an admissions process, which is what many, obviously, those children have done. They've been admitted to the local school, and where that happens particularly in the east of the county borough, but also in the north of the county borough, we have children coming from RCT into some of our schools, and East Talbot as well. So it's not unusual for those local authorities to make transport available to our schools because they just so happen to be a lot closer than their schools, and therefore it would be significantly cheaper for their local authority to provide transport for them to our school. So there isn't an impact in respect to this policy proposal on any child who's coming from out of county into Bridgend. I've covered, I think, previously the impact of post-16 in respect of Welsh medium and faith, and what I mentioned there was the choice, positive discrimination, and it may be a decision, obviously, for Cabinet to consider, or it will be a decision for Cabinet to consider the impact of the policy proposal of not including English medium learners at post-16 and non-faith-based learners at post-16. But we have a statutory duty in respect of Welsh medium education to promote and grow the Welsh language. And we do not feel if we didn't protect those learners at post-16, that the impact on the choice of a Welsh medium education would then not be impacted by that decision. And similarly, faith, given its geographical dispersed nature. And in respect of sort of semi-rural locations you mentioned, well, in many respects, those are the young people probably that will continue to benefit from home to school transport, because many of them will live in parts of the county borough where there are no available walk-in routes to their nearest suitable school. So we will have to continue by our statutory duty to provide transport for those. So I take your point, but I think the issue is here that many young people will continue to, in this more semi-rural parts of the county, but still continue to be in receipt. And I can't imagine a scenario, for example, where anybody from Hale-a-Kew go into Pencoed Comprehensive School or Pencoed Primary School will not ever have school transport provided for them under the current Welsh Government policy, under the Learner Travel Wales measure, because the route is not safe. And we've assessed it as unsafe, so therefore we'll continue to provide transport to them on that basis. Back to you, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Dendy is next.
Thank you, Chair. Just to start off, I want to add on to one of the points that Alex made about looking at how it's going to affect each student and stuff like that. And I was wondering if free school meals and how many pupils because I think free school meals is a good representative of whether somebody would be able to continue to get transport to go somewhere. I know with most importantly with like post-16 education, although I know that's not a statutory thing, if there's a lot of people from free school meals background from that particular area where there's also post-16 people, and that will affect then if they have to find their own transport to get there and the cost that's associated with that. On that sort of thing as well is I was wondering if when it came to post-16, if there was no transport that was given to them, and I'm guessing they'll have to rely on a public bus service, and if that's the case, I know I asked for it to be put in recommendations in a previous scrutiny meeting about whether it has been looked at the costs for pupils from each areas of how much that would be on the public transport services that are available, and also the routes that are currently available as well. I mean, I know that was a problem for me if I'd missed the bus in the morning to get into Anasaudra, which is now CCYD. If you were going to catch public transport, you'd be getting off in Bremennin and you'd have to walk that distance, which is, it's not really feasible to ask students to do that, really. And especially since that area, especially going across over that area with those main roads, is actually quite dangerous. Doesn't matter whether you're young or you're old. It's still not a relatively good idea. One of the other things as well is you said that there was a lot of confusion over some of the proposals that came through. Looking at that, have you seen where the sort of failure was in explaining to the public about those options and what they entailed? Because it seems if you've got so many of them coming from so many people, it wasn't the odd one or two who got confused about proposals. It was actually quite a few. And I think that maybe then with that, if they'd known the true nature of the options, maybe they would have put different responses. So is it sort of skewed in that sort of way that people didn't have the full information? And then also going on to the sort of positive discrimination as well. When you go back to post-16 again, although you need to let people be able to go, and I can understand with the Welsh schools and the faith schools, but areas that are further away, rural areas like mine in the Gower Valley, post-16 is needed, that education. It's a good opportunity for people from here, and by not providing that post-16, would that not be just discrimination against the lower people from lower incomes and from the sort of valleys communities. Thanks.
Okay, Robin.
Thanks, Councillor Dendy. I think in terms of free school meals, one of the things that we've identified previously is perhaps some of the support that is available. It's not significant, but there is educational maintenance allowance for those who are eligible to claim on benefits, that particular benefit. My Travel Past Cymru is the national strategy to support young people aged 16 plus, 16 to 19, I think it is, in terms of 1/3 off the cost of the bus journeys. But I think the point you're making, Councillor Dendy, around the routes and costs, there's likely to be significant variation across the county borough in a young person attending their nearest secondary school who or post 16 may have to take a fairly short bus journey, whether another child may have to take a very lengthy, costly bus journey. We haven't done any significant analysis on that. I think we just acknowledging that is a scenario. I think you've made a very important point, and we will see what information we can find that may support Cabinet's decision. But go back to the point we make about the confusion of the proposals. I don't think it was significant, and the policy proposal it related to mostly was the policy proposal around the removal of the examples from our policy of the discretionary arrangements that we will make. So if it was misinterpreted, it was probably skewed in the right way in that it was not understood, so there was negative comments behind it rather than positive comments, because actually that presents a picture which is of more value to Cabinet. But it's not one, I think, where there are any significant implications as a result of that policy proposal, because effectively we could leave the policy as it was. It only helps the public by us removing those specific examples anyway. And in terms of positive discrimination, again, I think I've picked up on those points previously in my previous responses. I think it's a decision for Cabinet to make, and whether or not the current proposal as it stands significantly impacts those who are non-Welsh medium learners and faith-based learners to a point at which they want the policy to be equitable, and that's not a decision obviously for me as just the officer. I've undertaken a consultation on the proposals, but I can understand why it may be felt that there's an element of discrimination there, but that's something which obviously we will be presenting to Cabinet. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Canon Edward Evans, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm afraid I have to come back on this discrimination point again. I've not read a document for a long time that's such hugely discriminatory. First point, you talk about faith education in a sixth form at a voluntary aided school within Bridgend. What about Bishop of Llandaff School? It is the legal right of any person to attend their faith school of their particular denomination if they so choose. So by restricting it to voluntary aided schools within Bridgend, you are discriminating against any Anglican who wishes to receive sixth form education. I suspect that is illegal, given the School Standards Organisation Act 2013, and I will be referring that to the Church in Wales legal advisors. Secondly, why is there the discrimination between faith schools and Welsh medium schools rather than maintained schools? My understanding of the Welsh Language Act is that Welsh has to have parity with English, not take precedence over or priority over. So there is no justification whatsoever for prioritising Welsh medium schools as opposed to maintained schools. And then my third point is again about pupils who live in the Yarra Valley. It's not their fault that CCYD is based where it is, and they have to make a journey to the school. I've asked a head of department of her views at CCYD, her views on this. She asked her class in the sixth form how many would continue with their education if transport was withdrawn, and the response was that most wouldn't. They couldn't afford it, they wouldn't want to do it. If they were to do it, there would be increased traffic, the number of cars, either the students' cars themselves or parental cars, bringing the children to school. There's a whole host of things why post-16 education should continue across the board to receive transport. And I would add that my connection is with Brynterian Comprehensive School, and that is the only school in the borough that doesn't have BCBC paid transport. So I'm not, on this occasion, reflecting a school that is going to suffer because of the withdrawal of post-16 education. I have to repeat, I've never read for a very long time such a discriminatory document originating from a local authority. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, couple of points there, Robin. Do you want to pick up some of them? But some of them might be political as well. But if you want to cover as many as you can, Robin.
Yes, certainly. So I think the first point is just to remember that the proposal is about post-16 education, which in itself is non-statutory. So in that respect, non-statutory transport arrangements. So we have used our discretion as a local authority to provide transport to post-16 learners where Welsh Government has said we don't need to. So I suppose the proposal, which is part of the consultation, and this is just a proposal and it's going to Cabinet on the 21st of July, is just one of what could have been many iterations of that policy proposal. I take your point, Canon Evans. You know, what the proposal is doing is prioritising the sustainability of schools within the county borough. But you know, I think you've made an opinion well made there. In terms of you mentioned about the amount of traffic going to other schools. Has that been given consideration? And some other issues, yes, it's been given consideration. I mean, I will go back to the fact that this policy was changed in 2015, and there was a significant piece of work that led up to that policy proposal change around the impact on the environment, traffic counts outside schools, what it actually meant. And you know, just reminding, you know, this is not about changing the policy in terms of statutory distances. It is in this context. I think the context you're relating to is about post-16. But as I say, I think I've covered that one off. I don't know if Lindsay wants to come in or Councillor Smith wants to pick up on some of the other points.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Do you want me to come in?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lindsay.
A couple of things, really. First of all, let's pick up the Welsh language one. Councillor Canon Evans is correct about parity, but the requirement placed on local authorities more recently is around promoting the Welsh language. So that's something that we would need to do, and this is fully in line with promoting the Welsh language. And it's something I would advise Cabinet to follow. So that would be certainly where we've come from on the Welsh language one. On the second one around the CCYD pupils, I think it's recognised within the paper that Robin's talked to. It talks about some of the challenges that some of our learners in valley communities would have that. So when Cabinet make a decision on it, they would be fully aware of some of the challenges and issues that these learners would have. And finally, as far as the issue around supporting faith schools is concerned, again, I would be very keen to provide Cabinet with the most rounded advice. Obviously, we are acting on our legal advice as well, Canon Evans, but I would certainly welcome a discussion with diocesan legal colleagues and just to make sure the Cabinet to give them the most appropriate advice.
Would Councillor Smith like to come in?
Can I just say thank you to Lindsay for that? Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I don't know if Charles is there and wants to come in, or should we?
Yeah, I'll say what I can. Again, I can't say too much, otherwise I'll be accused of predetermining the Cabinet decision. The difference between this topic and the previous topic is that with this topic we have been presented with a budget cut, and we are working towards a sum of money. We don't want this budget cut. I listened to a speech by our wonderful Prime Minister the other day where he said that austerity was no longer a policy, but that memo hasn't arrived at the civic offices yet, and we are still faced with this budget cut. And all I will say is that we don't intend to discriminate against anybody. If we have to, we'll look at people's needs and base our decisions on a needs base. But the Cabinet's greatest wish is not to make any cut at all to learner transport. And we'll be looking at what can be done over the next couple of weeks leading up to the Cabinet meeting. But we are very reluctant to do any of these proposals. In an ideal world, we would do none of them. At the end of the day, we might be faced with the need to prioritise things, and one of the things that your committee can do, well, two things you can do. Perhaps some people have got more expertise in this than others, but those of you who are on finance-based committees or on BREP could look at the corporation as a whole and look for a sum of money somewhere in the system that could be set against all or some of these cuts. That's the first thing. Prioritise on that larger scale. And then if the worst comes to the worst, help us prioritise within those recommendations. If we have to make those cuts, which cuts should come first and which ones could come last. Sorry to sound so miserable. I'm not by nature a miserable person, as some of you might have sussed out by now, but this is one of those miserable things that the Cabinet is faced with at the moment.
Right. Did you want to come back, Canon Evans?
No, just again to say thank you to Councillor Smith for that, and I'm sure that they will take into account many of the factors they've heard this afternoon. And as I've told Lindsay Harvey on more than one occasion, I wouldn't have his job for all the money in the world. I don't envy him having to make some of the decisions he's got to make. So, but I felt bound to make those points. I did. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Altaf Hussain is next.
Thank you, sir. Nice to see you all. I think many good points have been already made, and I agree with Reverend Evans. He highlighted the discrimination very well, and I second him. Now, the problem is that we have no safe walking or cycling route from Penway to schools. This has been our concern over the last 15 years. Now, recently, 620,000 funding has been given to the council, and it was the letter from the leader that they are looking in improving and providing more than 150 pedestrian and cycling crossing points. Now my question is, have you raised any time these concerns of Penway with the Transport and Highway Department? And it is obvious that their absence rather, in this meeting. So I would be grateful if you could kindly let me know about what your thoughts are about Penway and our walking routes and cycling routes. I know you will be also getting a 4 million package for active routes. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know who wants to pick that up. Was it directed at the Cabinet member, that question about the finances, Altaf?
So it was recently given 620,000.
Yeah. Who were you directing the question towards? Was it the Cabinet member?
Question is to the Robin. He knows about it because I had raised this with both Charles as well as Robin.
Okay.
And Robin has very kindly addressed that, and he had given, sent his email to Charles as well. So
Okay,
I'll
so
be grateful.
Charles and Robin.
I'll come in first. And with those active routes, as I understand it, that sum of money came up at pretty short notice, and we had to send in a proposal. So what was sent in was some ready-made proposals which Kwaku and his associates in the active travel section had, if you like, ready. What I've suggested among Cabinet colleagues, and I've suggested to Kwaku as well, so I'm not telling tales out of school, I've suggested that we do need a little bit more consultation on our active travel scheme. I know we've got active travel ambitions, and we've got a sort of a skeleton map of our ambitions for the long term of active travel. I think that needs updating. I do think there are opportunities that have been overlooked, and Penivey is certainly one of them. So I think we do need to have some discussions on those active travel maps, and anybody with any influence in Welsh Government could also ask them to be a little bit more long-term in what they do, because the budgeting seems to be on a year-by-year basis. So if we have any really ambitious schemes, for example, if we wanted to link Bridgend directly to Porthcawl without going round the houses through Pyle and that sort of thing, which is what the leisure routes do, if we wanted a commuter route, or one which would be useful for college students even, and older pupils. That's very difficult to do on an annual budget basis, because annual budgets are too small for that kind of grand scheme. So there's lots of discussions needed on those. Sorry, I can't help any further.
Thank you very much, Charles,
Robin.
as always. Yes, but Robin, probably I'll love to hear him.
Sorry, the delay in icons. Yes, I think just to provide assurance, I suppose, to the committee. I mean, we won't be expecting any child to walk on a route that we haven't assessed as available, and I think it's quite clear that the route currently from Penivey to certainly to Bryn Tirion and to Archbishop McGrath Catholic High School is not suitable, and we've identified that as such. I suppose if money then becomes available to the local authority, and it is clear in our policy, and we can put in place provision that means that a walk route does then therefore become available, then there's a process to go through by which then there's a potential to withdraw transport, which in itself has efficiency savings. I think, and that's inherent in the policy, and it's been in the policy for many, many, many years. I suppose it's just now that perhaps the money is more available to do these things because the active travel agenda is very strong from the Welsh Government. So I suppose, at the moment, Councillor saying we're just working through a process. But obviously, I obviously take all the points on board that Councillor Smith has said about joining much of this up. But I think, obviously, we will formally need to assess any improvement to any route that's put in place to ensure that it's safe for any learner attending the schools in the county borough. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'll be grateful if it is put in the report and in the minutes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alta, for your question. Next question, Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
Sorry for my delay. Mine links on perfectly from that. It's along the same lines of active travel, because I've been raising this now for the last 3 years, I've put in a number of referrals and I've yet to receive a response. So I've been told I'd have meetings and I've never had a meeting yet about it, because I do believe there's also wastage where we could be saving money from buses and busing children to school by putting in small areas of footpath or crossing points and looking at the active travel to school. Because I know, for example, in Coity, there's a bus that takes children who can see the school because they haven't got a safe place to cross a road. And I've been asking, and I think local members need to be involved in this, and we need to be saying, as I have been doing for 3 years on deaf ears, this is my ward, this is what I know, this is where we can be saving money. And so far, nobody's come forward to speak to me and help me out with that. And in addition, I've also raised as part of Development Control Committee that when we're looking at new houses and large estates or new schools, education not only need to be involved in the school, but the active travel routes to that school, because they're then footing a bill for busing children because that part of the planning hasn't been considered. Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda. I don't know if anybody wants to come back on Amanda's points there. Lindsay, perhaps?
Thanks, Councillor Gifford. The one thing I'll certainly do is to make sure that Councillor Amanda Williams gets a meeting with a relevant officer. So I can only apologise if that's not the case, because that's certainly not the way we operate. So apologies, and I'll certainly do that. As far as conversations are concerned about making sure we're involved in active planning routes, yes, we are. And I think the challenge is, as I mentioned to Councillor Williams previously, it is a challenge for us, because obviously there's two things here, really. Councillor Williams is absolutely right. We want to reduce the pressure on the revenue budget, but also it's an ideal opportunity for learners to get more exercise. So it's a good thing on 2 points. But I'll certainly, if you contact me after the meeting, Councillor Williams, I'll make sure you get that meeting.
Great. Councillor Pam Davis, then next, please.
Thank you, Chair. To say that I'm perplexed is a great thing, but regarding the escorts for school, I had this conversation with Lindsay several months ago, and you probably will remember it, because one of the residents approached me. She's got a nursery in the morning, but she actually acts as escort for several different school children and youths, some of which are epileptic and also have diabetes, and to you, Robin, say that the driver doesn't get involved. I can understand that, but it's still a great thing if you have somebody having an epileptic fit in the back of the car. The escorts, I was told, are employed either by the agency or by us via, obviously, places like Easy Ways and other taxi firms. And it is up to the taxi firm to, if you like, allot that person to whatever child or youth they are escorting. Now, my question is, at the time I was told there's no statutory obligation to employ escorts, and I think that's going down a rough track. If something was to happen to one of these children or youths, then I think we'd be in serious trouble. I wonder how many of our escorts have got first aid certificates, etc. And when we do these individual assessments for the individual children and youths, are they allotted somebody that actually has a first aid certificate? Because it's all very well and good saying the driver has nothing to do with it and he can pull in. You can't always pull in when one of these children are in the middle of a fit or if they're in the middle of a hypoglycemic attack. And I'm wondering how they assess, and do they actually assess a child or a youth with a particular carer, because it doesn't seem to be any sort of control over what qualifications those carers have. Thanks a lot.
Okay. One for Robin, probably, I imagine.
Yeah, happy to pick that one up. Thanks, Councillor Davis. You're right, the role of escorts, as I mentioned, is non-statutory, but I think I've also mentioned the role the local authority has, the statutory role it has in assessing the needs of all learners. And in that assessment, the local authority may determine it appropriate for an escort. Now, I think in terms of some of the specific situations you've identified, some of the medical conditions some of these learners have, they will generally be very well known to us, and we're not proposing to remove escorts from those types of learners. I want to be very clear about that up front. We're not talking about children and young people with additional learning needs, and that will include a medical issue. And many of those young people are attending some of our special placements. Many of them attend Heronsbridge Specialist School. And where we've tendered for those contracts, we've been quite explicit about the types of escorts and drivers that we've required and the types of training that they've needed as well. So far more than the mainstream big bus contracts, let's call them that. These are specialist drivers and escorts delivering specialist bespoke services. There is no proposal to remove escorts from those, so I just want to be very clear about that. Maybe I wasn't clear about that earlier on. Hopefully that's provided you with some reassurance, but there is an assessment process that we go through for the child. The inclusion service is closely involved. They are very clear with us about what we need to provide to ensure the safety of that child, and that when we go to tender, then that's when we provide the escort and driver. And I can draw upon a number of examples where over the last 2 years where we've changed contracts, and there's been a little bit of pushback from parents on the basis those contracts have been provided to another operator. The impact that's had on the child, even though the new operator may have an equivalent trained escort and driver, we've actually gone back and we've provided that contract back to the old operator again because of the needs of the child and the security that provides the family and the child, because some of the drivers and the escorts are very well known to them, have been operating on those routes for many, many years, and in many respects are very good friends and confidants in terms of the needs of the child. So I hope that's provided you with that reassurance, Councillor Davis.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Right, I think that concludes the questions then, because Councillor White is withdrawn. So can I thank all of the invitees, the many, many invitees we've had today, from the head teachers to the officers, the cabinet member and the pupil invitees as well. So thank you all very much for joining. I'll just give everybody, all the invitees, a minute just to log off the call before we do the recommendations. So thank you once again on behalf of the whole committee. Okay, right. Okay, so just while we're wrapping up here, and I'll try and fire through this as quick as I can. I don't know if the scrutiny officers, Andrew, Merrill, or someone wants to come in and run us through perhaps some of the recommendations that we have picked up to this point, and maybe we can develop them further.
Chair, I was just checking who's present a moment.
Yeah, no problem. Looks okay to me.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So we've been at it now for about almost 4 hours, and in that time we've obviously asked a lot of questions. We've got a lot of themes going on both reports about things members have raised and have concerns about, and in spite of having answers on some of those points, they still remain as concerns then they would want to pass on to the cabinet. So what I'm proposing, Chair, on the first report, which was post 16, there were recommendations to cabinet on just one. I think if you look at the members look at the pre-meeting agenda that we had this morning, might be easier, or they may rather look at their own report. Just bear with me one moment. Right, so for the first report then, we've got recommendations to cabinet of option 3 going forward, but then all of the other sub-proposals, if you like, that members have explored. And I wonder if you will allow us to, because I say there are 4 hours of comments on all of these, that we could have some time to look to draw those all out and come back to you and circulate them to members for approval.
I think that's sensible. If any members haven't got any objections to that, I think that's probably the most sensible way of doing this.
With the second report, there obviously, the difference with this one is that it is a budget saving, and there are no there's no specific proposal to Cabinet. Those 5 proposals are going into the report to Cabinet in their entirety. So again, there's been a very long discussion and a number of points, and the themes that have been explored. But the reason I'd say this one is different to the last is the Cabinet member mentioned that they will have to make some savings somehow, and whether the committee had any preference, if you like, or priority on each of the 5 proposals. So as well as gathering together the comments and points made to go back to Cabinet and coming back to circulate them to you all, I wondered if there was any view on whether you wanted to, if there were any that you were definitely against, definitely for, or if you're against all of them really. So if there was any just to discuss that, or if you just wanted to go with the individual comments, because it may be difficult to get consensus on that as a committee as well.
So in terms of budget, I think Councillor Green has made the point of whether there's a possibility to refer to corporate. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I bring Amanda in now, was actually Amanda's point about, there are actually opportunities to save on budgets, as Amanda identified, that were not necessarily have been picked up on in the past.
Yes.
So I know Amanda wants to come in and speak. So do you want to come in, Amanda?
Yeah, thanks. Hang on, restart my video. Yeah, 2 points. One, this morning when I asked about the fact that the recommendations, there weren't recommendations on there really, just the report. I was told it was our opportunity this afternoon to put our recommendations together to go to Cabinet so we could specifically outline what our recommendations are. And then secondly, like I said, for the last 3 years, I've sent numerous referrals. I've spoken to Lindsay and he said, yes, we'll have a meeting. I've raised it in development control, and the same people, anyone else who's on development control will be able to tell you as well. We raise the same things, that education are never at any of these committee meetings, so they're not involved. So we do really need to recommend that ward members, particularly if they're familiar with areas, need to be more involved, and they need to really look at active travel, because they could be saving a fortune. They send a large bus with a handful of children to Coity Primary, and they live less than 500 metres from the school. It's ridiculous. So we need to be looking at savings there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Cheryl, I know you made a suggestion about corporate. I know you chair that committee, so perhaps you want to come in with a kind of rationale there so everybody understands.
Come on.
I can hear you now. I can't see.
Yeah, sorry, my screen is just flickering and flickering, and I'm missing the button. I was only suggesting, because there was something that Councillor Smith said, that if we could come up with something that we could find savings on in the budget, then he would happily. Really, was something, if we can make the recommendation that we are concerned, and obviously there's really good concerns about removing some of these transports, but perhaps we could also look at an alternative way of finding that money.
Yeah, agreed.
Chair, if I may, I think the BREF will be commencing shortly. We've been asked to look for dates for that. However, the Cabinet will be looking at this report on the 21st of July, so the report will be going out next week. So I think whereas you would be able to look at that and maybe find savings elsewhere, you still need to make recommendations to Cabinet about the proposals that have been before us today. I wasn't suggesting that you don't make those recommendations. I was simply saying that you've made so many points today, and in order not to miss any of those out, that you gave us the opportunity to go through them and gather them together and send them back to members for approval before we send them to Cabinet, because there's just so many points that we need to pull together and do it justice.
Oh, I'd be happy for that. Yeah.
But if anybody, like what Councillor Williams has just said, that would all be in that submission, and it'll come back to you for approval before it goes anywhere. The members of this committee.
Yeah, can you also check, Meryl? I'm sure last year John Paul has just mentioned it in the chat. The BREP made recommendations around learner travel that were not necessarily picked up in terms of budget savings. So whether they, could be incorporated in some way, as the Cabinet member mentioned, budget savings specifically, that might be an idea as well.
Okay, I can't obviously speak from experience because that was before my time, but we can look into that and incorporate those in the comments that we circulate to you all for approval.
It may not be appropriate, but
if you're happy.
If the work's been done before and not picked up, why reinvent the wheel is what I thought.
I think there are a number of people typing at the moment, so if we bear with.
Okay. Is this not part of the BREP learner travel recommendations? So from memory, Carolyn, and off the top of my head, I think we made recommendations in the last round of BREP that went to Cabinet for the budget, and they weren't picked up. So that might be, like I say, if he's still looking for savings, Cabinet member, that might be somewhere for him to get.
Can I? It's probably easier if I speak, Tom, rather than do this.
Sure.
I thought that this post-16 review of transport was part of that BREP recommendation, and because of the legalities around it and the everything like that, this is what they came up with. So I'm a little bit confused about that.
I can't remember the exact BREP recommendation, if I'm being honest with you, so I might need to consult and come back to you on it.
We can certainly look into that and bring it back to you when we circulate the comments that everybody's made today for your approval, the whole committee.
There we are. And I think Alex Williams has made a good point there, which also can be picked up. So unless there are any other recommendations, then I presume the notes obviously from today's quite lengthy meetings will just follow then, and we'll go at it on email then. If I'm right thinking.
Yeah, Tom, I made the recommendation.
Oh, sorry, have I missed it, Ken? Do apologise if I have. Yes, yeah, sorry, I got it here. Yeah.
So I'm trying to start the video. There we go. Yeah, I made it just further up the screen there about the blended learning, that it needs to be supported and to be made a priority. I mean, I think rarely Charles and I are in agreement here that that's something that needs to be really pushed. So yes, I would require that to be a recommendation.
Agreed. And presumably with blended learning, it doesn't even have to be within the boundaries of Bridgend. That's something you could work collaboratively on if you want to offer.
Absolutely, it's limitless virtually. It's limitless.
And just finally, Carolyn, then to come in on Ken's point for blended learning, and then we'll just try and cap this off.
Thanks. Yes. With regard to that, I think there's a couple of issues which jumped out, which was the fact that Central South Consortium is already working on it. There does seem to be a push nationally for that to go in, but I wasn't very happy with the response that I got about the blended learning and ALN and picking up on things. There was no response at all, really, with regard the what picking up on disabilities which become evident at a certain age, which happens to tie in with the age that they're aiming blended learning at. So that was quite an unsatisfactory response from that. So I would like to know what communications they're having with disability organisations and the ability to learn through a blended learning solution.
Yeah, and finally, Sorrel makes a point about previous recommendations of scrutiny. Now, I remember at one stage when Rachel Keefans was doing it, we would have like the traffic light system for previous recommendations, and unless I've missed that, that's sort of stop, Meryl. I don't know if that is something that didn't carry over when there was a staff scrutiny or.
Again, it's before my time, but we can certainly have a look at it. Obviously, we'll try and do this as quickly as possible and get it round to you. But I will be guided by my colleagues as to when this could have happened then, really, and where to look,
Yeah, I mean, I remember Rachel used to do them, and it was essentially like red, amber, and green, and it was sort of green if the recommendation had been taken forward, and red if it hadn't, and amber if it was kind of somewhere in between. So it was quite a useful way of just keeping tabs of the recommendations we'd made and what Cabinet had done with them. So Sorrel refreshed my memory. There's quite a handy way of looking at it. Okay. I think that covers everything that we're looking to raise in the recommendations. I look forward to the email then, Meryl. It's probably the best way to do this. And we'll take it from there, if that's okay.
Councillor, Reverend Evans has just made the point about the discrimination as well. So.
Yes, we'll incorporate that as well. Okay, brilliant.
And not to forget Penaway.
We would never forget Penaway.
No, thank you.
We wouldn't dare. Okay, right,
okay.
Brilliant. All right, well, if that's everything then, thanks everybody for today. Mammoth 4-hour session. Do appreciate your time. And draw this meeting to a close. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very
Bye.
much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Oh, good.